For the record, I just want to say that I'm not speculating about motives beyond what was actually stated directly here, and I am avoiding assumptions that cannot be supported by observable actions. So, in October of 2023, I was a university student living somewhere abroad, temporarily based on the outskirts of this place. At the time, I had limited financial resources and was also trying to relocate due to my family-related constraints. My bank balance was effectively depleted at this point, and I was actively searching for either a room rental or a shared living arrangement within a strict budget. Because of this, I relied on a popular housing and roommate platform that allows direct messages between users. I responded to an advertisement offering a room at a price well below market rate. The initial contact was with a man who claimed to be helping an older woman rent space in her own home. Our conversation focused on my financial situation and timeline, and shortly afterward, he gave me the woman's phone number and suggested that I contact her directly. That same evening, I spoke with the woman. The discussion shifted quickly from housing logistics to personal questions. She asked about visitors, relationship history, sexual experience, and religious beliefs. These questions were framed sort of casually, I guess, but their relevance to housing was pretty unclear to me at the time. I dismissed this as inappropriate but not necessarily dangerous. And given my urgency to find accommodation too, I sort of brushed it off. She later told me that she had already chosen another tenant, but suggested that a friend of hers sometimes helped students in similar situations. She described him repeatedly as generous and supportive. She provided his contact information and continued to emphasize his reliability. The man contacted me shortly afterward too. He owned a small tailoring and repair shop in the city. He proposed meeting in person to discuss a potential apartment and suggested that I stop by the shop the following afternoon. Although this raised some concerns for me, my lack of alternatives really influenced my decision to agree here. So, I arrived at the shop at around 3:30 the next day. The man appeared to be in his late 60s. The shop was cluttered, poorly lit, and disorganized. He spoke at length about his personal history and positioned himself as someone who regularly assisted young women with housing and also finances. He claimed that an apartment nearby would be available for 3 months, starting in November, and that he could convince the owner to extend the arrangement. He added, though, that I would likely need to share the apartment with another woman to keep the costs low. After leaving, he contacted me again and asked whether I would be willing to help clean and organize the shop in exchange for some cash. He framed it as informal work, and I agreed, given my financial situation. When I returned a few days later, I spent several hours cleaning storage areas and folding clothing. The environment was pretty unpleasant, and the conversations remained pretty much one-sided, with him discussing personal relationships and unrelated anecdotes. Toward the end of the visit, he suggested that we go to view the apartment, so we drove together to the location. The apartment itself was functional, but pretty unwelcoming. The woman who answered the door was dismissive and ended the visit abruptly too. I indicated that I needed to leave afterward, but instead the man insisted on stopping by his own apartment first, stating that it was only fair that I see it as well. At his apartment, he showed me a single bedroom and suggested that I could stay there temporarily if my housing situation became urgent. He mentioned that other young women had done so in the past. I declined without confrontation, and he paid me for the cleaning work and dropped me back at the public transit station. Over the following week, I avoided further contact, and when he continued messaging me about work and housing, I told him that my situation had changed and that I no longer needed assistance, and despite this, he persisted. Due to another unexpected expense, I eventually agreed to return to the shop for one more day of work. The visit differed in tone this time. During the cleaning, he began describing previous arrangements with students that he claimed to have helped, repeatedly referencing money, hotel stays, and even some sexual encounters. He framed these stories as normal and mutually beneficial. I didn't encourage the conversation at all, and I even attempted to redirect or leave at some point. He then began asking me personal questions, similar to those previously asked by the woman. He suggested visiting a supplier where clothing would need to be tried on without private facilities. He referenced other women who had supposedly been comfortable doing this. When I stated that I was not in a relationship, his demeanor changed noticeably too. His questions became explicit and increasingly direct. At this point, I indicated that I needed to leave immediately. He had not paid me yet, mind you, but he went to retrieve the money and asked me to follow him to the back of the shop. I stopped near the doorway instead. When he returned, he briefly withheld the payment and suggested going to his apartment in exchange for additional money. I declined and repeated that I needed to leave. He continued negotiating, escalating from money to physical contact, including requesting a kiss at one point. I refused, though, and reiterated that I was leaving. After several seconds, he released the payment and gave me a bag of items that I didn't inspect. I exited the shop without further interaction, and that was it. Once outside, though, I discarded the bag and I left the area using public transit. I blocked his number, and the woman's number as well, immediately. Later that evening, the original man from the housing platform contacted me again, though, offering financial help tied to a housing arrangement and urging me to be quick about it. I declined, and I blocked him as well. No further contact occurred between these people, but about 6 months later, I was watching the news and I could barely believe my eyes when I saw the man that I had been working for, and he had apparently murdered a young woman. I won't go into the details because it's pretty gruesome, but needless to say, clearly, I really got lucky. In retrospect, there were multiple warning signs that I dismissed due to financial pressure and lack of alternatives. And while no physical assault or anything else occurred, the situation escalated through boundary violations and coercive negotiation. I chose to not contact law enforcement at the time as no explicit crime had occurred, and I didn't believe that the report would lead to any action or anything, and genuinely, I really regret that. This experience definitely altered how I assess informal work and housing offers now. The primary risk was not a single event, but definitely a gradual shift from assistance to leverage, and that's what really gets to me. I no longer engage with arrangements that rely on personal dependency or vague obligations like this, regardless of my financial need or anything. These days, I would rather rough it on the street than ever trust a stranger like this again. So I had recently relocated from the west coast of the United States to western Pennsylvania for work. I was 24 at the time, and I didn't have any existing social connections in the area. My job involved long, irregular hours and little interaction outside of a small professional circle. So to compensate, I used a friend-matching app designed specifically for platonic connections. My first meeting through the app went pretty normal, which lowered my caution for sure. A few weeks later, I matched with another woman, Rachel, who was 22 at the time. We exchanged messages for several days. The conversation was frequent and one-sided, but not overtly alarming or anything. We agreed to meet for a late morning brunch at a cafe located within a large outdoor shopping complex. When Rachel arrived, I immediately noticed that she did not closely resemble her profile photos. The difference was not extreme, but the images appeared either heavily edited or certainly outdated at the very least. I didn't address this, to be honest. I was just looking for a friend. And within minutes of sitting down, she began discussing personal trauma, financial instability, and ongoing family conflicts. The pace was fast and uninterrupted, and during this conversation she mentioned that she didn't drive and briefly referenced having 2 children, though she did not elaborate on that. The interaction lasted longer than I had intended, and when I attempted to redirect or end the conversation, she continued speaking over me. Eventually, I stated that I needed to leave, and I excused myself to use the restroom. She insisted on walking with me, though. The restroom was located on the opposite side of the complex, requiring a several-minute walk, and while inside a stall, I heard a child calling out. When I exited, Rachel was now holding a toddler. She appeared momentarily surprised herself, then introduced the child as her son. The child reacted aggressively, hissing and sort of backing away. Shortly afterward, I noticed a man waiting just outside of the restroom area with a stroller. Rachel introduced him as her partner. He did not acknowledge me directly. She encouraged me to interact with the second child in the stroller, and when I sort of complied briefly, the child began crying. At that point, I ended the interaction and left. I watched them walk to a vehicle together, and I was confused by the logistics. Rachel had stated that she didn't drive and had not mentioned that her partner and children were present at the location or nearby during our meeting. The timing of their appearance coincided precisely with my attempt to leave as well, which was weird. Anyway, I walked back toward my car and stopped at a food stand along the way. And while waiting, I called a friend and described the encounter. I then noticed Rachel's partner standing behind me in the line. He didn't speak to me, and I ended up leaving without ordering and headed toward the parking area. As I walked, I became aware that he was following me at a consistent distance. When I changed pace, he adjusted accordingly, and I informed my friend of what was happening and told her to contact the local authorities if I didn't check back shortly. I reached my car and I saw him crossing the parking lot toward me at a faster pace. I quickly got into my vehicle and I left immediately. I didn't stop as well until I was well away from the area. I also confirmed my safety with my friend. That evening, I deleted my account on the app and I blocked Rachel on the only other platform that she had access to. The following day, though, she contacted me through a different social media account that I had not shared, suggesting another group outing involving her partner this time. Well, as you can probably imagine, I blocked that account as well. And after that, there was no further contact. Now, I cannot determine whether this was an attempt at manipulation, surveillance, or something more sinister. What is very clear, though, is that there was something very, very suspicious going on. This occurred in March of 2023, on a weekday evening, while I was commuting home from work in regional New South Wales, outside of a mid-sized town west of Newcastle. The traffic was pretty moderate that day. Visibility was clear, and I was traveling within the posted speed limit on a 2-lane road that connects several residential areas to a highway spur. From a distance, I noticed erratic movement several vehicles ahead. 2 youths were repeatedly changing lanes, accelerating, then braking abruptly. As traffic compressed around a bend, I closed the distance and became directly behind one of the vehicles involved. At that point, the interaction between the 2 drivers appeared to de-escalate simply because congestion limited their ability to maneuver, but within seconds of being behind this vehicle, the driver began deliberately braking without cause and reducing speed far below traffic flow. I didn't respond in any way other than maintaining distance. The behavior escalated, though, when the driver leaned out of the window and displayed a large bladed object. From my perspective, it appeared consistent with a machete or a long knife at least. At that point, I initiated an emergency call. There was a delay in the connection, which felt prolonged under stress, but was likely under 2 minutes, I would say. But while waiting, I continued straight, hoping the driver would remain on the main road. At an upcoming intersection near a service station, I turned toward a secondary road that leads closer to my home. That decision immediately proved incorrect. The other driver followed, accelerating aggressively. At this point, the emergency call connected and I provided my location, vehicle description, and explained that I was being followed by an armed driver. The dispatcher acknowledged the information but didn't provide actionable guidance beyond telling me to just stay on the line. Realizing that continuing toward my home would put me in a more isolated area, I diverted to a nearby rural fire station that I knew was staffed overnight. I pulled into the driveway and stopped directly in front of the building. The other vehicle followed and stopped behind me, then reversed and then pulled forward again, repeating this several times. My vehicle's horn was non-functional. I exited the car and began shouting and knocking on the station doors and windows. After maybe 30 seconds, a firefighter inside noticed and opened a side door. I was brought inside immediately and the building was secured. The other driver remained nearby briefly, drove past the station multiple times, then left the area. Police arrived roughly 40 minutes later and I provided a statement and photographs of the vehicle and all that. The response that I received was pretty limited, though. Officers indicated that they would patrol the area, but made no assurance of follow-up. No further contact occurred, and the individual was not located that night, too. Thankfully, I got out of the incident unscathed, but still, it was a bit of a shame that it didn't get resolved because of law enforcement intervention, but because I placed myself in a setting where witnesses and barriers existed. I really don't know what was going on with those guys and why they were behaving so erratically like that on the highway, but I'm just glad that I was thinking on my feet and I got to somewhere safe quickly. Some years back, I was contracted for a short-notice overnight job in Philadelphia in a former institutional building constructed in the late 1800s. The structure, it had been vacant for decades at this point, I think, and was only reopened a few years earlier in a mixed-use creative and sort of commercial space. My role, it involved a niche fabrication process that required uninterrupted work between midnight and early morning, which is why the site arranged for overnight security coverage here. Now, from approximately, I would say 11:45 p.m. onward, only 2 people were ever present in the building, myself and a security officer assigned to remain on the ground floor. During our initial walkthrough, I made a casual comment about the old buildings having reputations. He responded plainly that nothing unusual had ever occurred during his shifts. He had been assigned there regularly for over a year now, and then there was no further discussion. I should probably note some background information here too, because it matters to how I sort of interpreted the events at the time. So in the older or historical dense buildings, I sometimes experience brief visual anomalies, momentary contrast shifts, or the impression of like someone standing nearby when nobody is there. But these don't occur in modern environments or daily life, like at all. They resolve immediately when I look directly at that area, and I've never experienced persistent visual distortion, disorientation, or fear associated with them, and I don't experience them outside of specific settings too. Because of that, I don't attribute them to hallucinations, but I also don't assign meaning to them beyond environmental stresses or cognitive noise. Now, During the early part of the night, I noticed those peripheral movements intermittently. I registered them and continued working, and my focus was pretty high, so I was pretty physically tired by the end of the night, and I had headphones on for extended periods as well. At about 4:20 in the morning, I would say, after several uninterrupted hours of work, I was organizing some tools on a low table and looking downward. I became aware of rapid movement directly in front of me, close enough that my immediate assumption was that the security officer had approached without announcing himself or something like that. Weirdly though, my body reacted before I fully processed what I was even seeing, and the figure appeared human, adult and male with a compact build. The movement was fast but controlled, and not aggressive by any means. In the fraction of a second before the image resolved, I noticed clothing that didn't match the security uniform. A long, dark garment with a rigid vertical line at the neck, consistent with older clerical attire. There was no audible sound, no footfall, and no continuation of motion past that point. The figure was just simply no longer there anymore, and it was weird. The entire sequence lasted less than a second, but my physiological response was pretty immediate. Elevated heart rate, muscle tension, and a strong impulse to leave the area for sure. That response passed quickly, replaced by alertness rather than panic, I guess you could say. I didn't feel threatened, but I was unsettled by the proximity of the visual event compared to others that I had experienced in the past. I did consider reporting the incident to the security officer, but in the end I decided against it. There was no safety concern that I could articulate, and I didn't want to create unnecessary distraction or doubt about my professionalism during a contracted job. For the remainder of the shift, I continued working but monitored the environment more deliberately. There were no additional visual disturbances, no sounds, and no interactions of any kind anymore. I completed the project by morning without incident, and really, that was that. In the days that followed, I reflected on the event and reviewed contributing factors like sleep deprivation, prolonged focus, low lighting, and also an unfamiliar environment with complex visual geometry everywhere. I didn't experience anything similar again in that building, nor have I experienced in comparable settings. I don't describe the site as haunted. I describe it as an old structure used overnight under conditions that can produce brief perceptual anomalies. But what made this incident notable was not fear or the significance of it, but the clarity and the closeness of the visual that I saw, which definitely differed from anything else I had previously experienced there. I have no real explanation for what that was, and something tells me that it just wasn't normal, and I don't know, maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me or something, but when you go through something like this personally, it's hard to dismiss it as something like that. I'm 18 now, but this took place some time ago in a western Denmark town, in a residential property originally constructed in the late 1600s. The house is locally documented as having belonged to a naval merchant involved in privateering during the early modern period, although that history is mostly used for tourism and has no practical relevance to daily life, really. My family moved into the house when I was a toddler, and I lived there continuously for more than a decade. My earliest experiences began around age 7. At the time, I didn't interpret them as unusual, too. Objects in my bedroom would sometimes be displaced without explanation, books were found on the floor after being shelved properly, light scraping sounds from the ceramic stove that was no longer functional, and footsteps audible when nobody else was home. These events were intermittent and definitely inconsistent, but there was no real trigger, I guess you could say, and nothing occurred on command or anything like that. and because of that, they became sort of background noise rather than focal events. As I got older, the experiences stopped being limited to me, though. My younger sibling and my mother independently reported hearing movement and voices in parts of the house where nobody was present. The most disruptive moment, though, occurred during a family visit in 2019. We were seated together, talking normally, when my sibling abruptly stated that one of our grandmother's closest friends had died. Mind you, there was no context, no prior conversation, and there was also no visible emotional distress or anything like that. Adults corrected him immediately, but within minutes, my grandmother received a phone call confirming the death. Now, there was just no way that my sibling could have received that information beforehand. No one offered an explanation, and the subject was dropped immediately, but it was definitely weird. Between the ages of 14 and 16 as well, my own experiences diminished. I became more skeptical and actively tried to rationalize anything unusual. Occasional movement, such as ceiling fixtures swaying slightly or indistinct sounds, I always attributed them to air pressure, building age, or normal structural behavior. I really was just deliberately trying not to reinforce patterns that could be explained through confirmation bias, but that all changed after I began dating someone who had never been in this house before. You see, on her first visit to my bedroom, she reported feeling unwell within minutes. She described nausea, disorientation, and a strong sense of being watched, despite nothing observable being present. She had arrived feeling normal as well and had not consumed anything unusual. We initially dismissed it as just anxiety. However, the reaction repeated every time that she entered that specific room, and didn't occur anywhere else in the house or outside of it. On one occasion, after less than 10 minutes in that room, she moved to the window and vomited, and this happened multiple times over several visits. There were no similar symptoms in any other environments, and at that point we decided that it wasn't a coincidence. I asked my sibling to switch rooms with me, which he agreed to without any resistance. When my mother asked why, I explained what had been happening, and that prompted her to disclose experiences that she had not previously shared with me. So shortly after moving into the house years earlier, she had witnessed bathroom linens appear to lift and extend as if being pulled, without any airflow or contact or anything like that. My father dismissed the incident at the time and continues to reject all interpretations beyond mechanical causes. But she also reminded me of something that I had said as a preschooler that I do remember saying, that I had reoccurring dreams about a headless person holding an axe in the bathroom. I had no memory of this until she mentioned it again, and afterward I began having similar dreams repeatedly over a short period, which eventually stopped. After the room swap, my girlfriend no longer experienced any physical symptoms in the house again. Activity in my former room decreased significantly, and the only noticeable incident occurred once when my mother and I were present. A secured lid detached from a shelf and landed directly between us. The lid, though, was designed to clip in place and should not have fallen under normal conditions, and after that, nothing else followed. I have now lived in the other bedroom for approximately 2 years now, and there's been no other object movements or sounds that could not plausibly be attributed to the structure itself. The only persistent issue is a subjective sensation of being observed, which is intermittent and not associated with any visible cause. The most recent event occurred several months ago, and I noticed the word hello written on the exterior side of my bedroom window at some point. The location was pretty difficult to access due to dense landscaping and the height and everything, but there was no evidence of damage or forced access, and no further signs appeared, and nothing escalated after that. So I just assume that it's one of my siblings trying to play a trick on me. At this point, I don't claim that the house is haunted, but what I can say is that multiple occupants across different ages have all reported overlapping experiences over many years now, often without prior discussion. Whether the cause is environmental, psychological, or structural even, the pattern has been consistent enough that it has affected how rooms are used and how visitors respond to the space for sure. Nothing dramatic is happening now, thankfully. The house is pretty quiet, but it's not neutral and it never has been, and to be honest, I sort of feel like I'm just waiting for the next thing to happen. I grew up in a small rural town, in a detached two-story house that stood out because most homes in the area, they were single level. The house was built by my grandfather, and he lived there briefly before leaving to work abroad, shortly after the political and economic changes of the early 1990s. For most of my childhood, the house was used only occasionally by family members, mainly during holidays. But shortly after my grandfather left the country, he allowed an acquaintance to stay in the house temporarily. The man was struggling with substance abuse apparently, and had accumulated debt connected to criminal activity even. The arrangement was meant to provide him with a place to lie low for a time until he could resolve the situation. But this did not work. According to family accounts, he was found by the people he owed money to and also assaulted. He was warned that he had limited time to repay what he owed, or else. Within days, communication with him stopped. A relative was asked to check the property, and the man was discovered deceased on the upper floor, having taken his own life. The house was unoccupied at the time, and the body was not found immediately. My grandfather returned to handle the legal and practical aftermath of everything, including cleaning the interior. And after that, the house remained structurally unchanged for a long time. Now, years later, beginning around 2012, my immediate family began spending summers there again. We rarely used the upper floor because there was just no practical need for it, and nothing about it was discussed openly with visiting relatives. The incident was known, but certainly not treated as a defining feature of the house. In 2015, during a family gathering for a wedding, sleeping arrangements required that I shared an upstairs bedroom with a cousin. This was pretty unusual and, at the time, exciting rather than concerning. Only my grandparents and two children were sleeping on that floor, and one evening, while watching a movie, my grandfather decided to recount the earlier death in detail. He showed us the location above the stairs and explained how long the body had gone undiscovered for. There was no real intent to scare us or anything. It appeared to be sort of casual storytelling without consideration of the audience, I guess. Well, that night I had difficulty sleeping, as you can probably imagine. I stayed awake using a handheld game console until exhaustion finally set in, and after falling asleep briefly, I sort of woke up abruptly. I heard a repetitive sound that I later associated with tension or like friction, though at the time I didn't understand it. In my half-awake state, I perceived a figure in the corner of the room, though, positioned in a way that matched the story that I had been told earlier. I attempted to wake my cousin without any success, and my reaction was not strategic or rational by any means, but I threw nearby objects in the direction of this perceived figure. I then pulled the bedding over myself and focused on slowing my breathing. I eventually must have passed out or blacked out or something, because the next thing I know, in the morning, the room appeared normal. The figure was gone. However, the objects that I remembered throwing, they were scattered on the floor now. At breakfast, my grandfather commented on hearing moving from upstairs during the night and asked why items had been dropped. That confirmed that at least part of the event, my physical actions at the very least, had occurred. The experience definitely had a lasting effect on me too. I avoided staying overnight in that house for some time, and I tend to choose alternative accommodation when visiting the area now too. Not because I believe the house is dangerous or anything, but because the memory is tied to a loss of control during a very vulnerable moment. The story is sometimes told humorously now, but the reason why it remains memorable, for me at least, is that it demonstrates just how easily perception can break down when context, environment, and expectation align in all the wrong ways. In early 2011, my daughter and I moved after a difficult separation and a rushed relocation. The move was framed as a bit of a reset. The house was modest, recently vacated, and structurally ordinary, but from the first evening there was a persistent sense of, alertness, I guess you could say, that I just could not switch off. It felt like constant vigilance rather than fear, an awareness that did not fluctuate with lighting or noise or company. For the first several days, nothing concrete occurred. We unpacked, established routines, and tried to normalize the space a little bit. My daughter slept in a bedroom at the end of a narrow hallway, and I noticed that I avoided that hallway without consciously even deciding to, and at the time I just attributed this to unfamiliarity and fatigue. Now, on the sixth day, while standing at the kitchen sink in the late afternoon, I experienced a sudden spike in anxiety without any obvious trigger. My attention shifted down the hallway and I registered movement in my daughter's room. The image I perceived was brief and indistinct, but it was human-shaped, a figure wearing what looked like light-colored clothing entering the bedroom. It lasted less than a second, but I reacted before processing it rationally. I ran to the bedroom and found my daughter asleep. The room was unchanged. No door movement, no displaced objects, no sound, nothing. But even despite that, I picked her up and I kept her with me for the rest of the night that night. Sleep was minimal too. Over the following weeks, the house became associated with disrupted rest as well. I slept lightly and inconsistently most nights. During the day, I occasionally heard faint sounds from my daughter's room, tapping, low vocal noises, or even some movement at times. But none of it was consistent or reproducible, so I didn't think too much of it. I checked the house repeatedly, mind you. Pipes, windows, the roof space at one stage, and even some exterior trees that I thought might be tapping the house or something. But nothing definitive turned up. I didn't see the earlier figure again during this period, but the incident that ended our stay occurred maybe about 3 weeks later, in the early afternoon one day. So I had put my daughter down for a nap and went to the living room, and shortly after sitting down, I heard crying from the hallway. Strangely, it was quieter than her usual crying, though, and stopped abruptly. I hesitated, but did not immediately respond, assuming that she maybe had settled herself or something. But seconds later, I heard her bedroom door close with so much force, followed immediately by screaming. I ran to the door and attempted to open it, but the handle, it just wouldn't turn, and the door would not budge. As I pulled on it, I felt resistance through the handle, and even some movement. Mind you, the door's handle was not moving because of mechanical failure or anything like that. It was like somebody was holding it. The handle rotated briefly in the opposite direction, though, and then stopped. Eventually, I forced the door hard enough that it opened suddenly, damaging the drywall behind it. The room was empty, though, except for my daughter, who was pressed into the corner and clearly scared. She pointed toward her desk and she said that someone had been there and had frightened her. There were no marks on her, nothing in the room had changed, and no sign of any other person in there. But we left the house that day, and I didn't try to attempt to rationalize the event while still in the environment. Instead, I returned with family members later to retrieve our belongings, and I terminated the lease shortly afterward. Now, in the years since then, I have not experienced anything like that ever again. Thankfully, but Still, it has sat with me all these years, and it's something that I will never forget. When I was 14, my family moved into a rental house on the outskirts of Washington. The property, it had been vacant for several years by this point, and was known locally for repeated police activity related to illegal occupancy. Parts of the interior had been hastily repaired before we moved in, including ceiling panels and even some interior doors. I mention this because none of the events that I'm describing occurred before this address, and none have occurred outside of it too. Now, the first incident happened within the first few months. I was alone in my bedroom during the afternoon, sitting on the floor with some toys. I heard heavy footsteps moving down the hallway toward my door. I assumed it was one of my parents, and when I looked up, I saw a tall, dark, human-shaped figure standing in the hallway entrance. I registered clothing details, like a long coat, a wide-brimmed hat, but the figure had no visible facial features. It made a head movement that could be interpreted as acknowledgement, and then continued down the hall. When I followed, there was no one there. At the time, I didn't react strongly. I assumed it was my imagination layered over shadows and unfamiliar spaces, but nothing significant happened again for like several years after that. Around the time that I started high school, though, the incidents became more frequent but less visually distinct, I guess you could say. The first major physical disturbance occurred around 4 in the morning on a weekday one day. I was awake in bed when I heard a loud impact from the kitchen area. When I checked, I found a drying rack near the front door and a heavy pan in the living room, and both had been moved at least several feet from their normal locations. As far as I could tell, there was no signs of forced entry. I didn't investigate further, and I returned to my room because I was a bit spooked by it. Another incident involved a friend who was visiting after school one day. He was standing at the kitchen counter filling ice trays while I was in my bedroom. I heard a sharp noise followed by him yelling. When I entered the kitchen, the tray was broken on the floor and he was holding his face. He said that the tray had been stationary in his hands before it suddenly just struck him. His words, not mine. But there was no clear mechanical explanation for how that could have happened. But the event ended with an injury on him, so yeah, I mean, unless he did it to himself, I really don't know how to explain it. Beyond these, though, there were some small reoccurring elements too. Objects being displaced without obvious cause, peripheral movements that disappeared when directly observed, and also a bit of a sensation of being watched, which, look, I know is pretty typical of this sort of stuff, so I just mention it because it was there and I think I should take note of it. Also, another notable fact is that nearly every visitor to the house, independently, described the same feeling of like tension without ever being prompted. Which is weird, right? Well, my own experience has shifted over time from visual perception to physical sensation, and while awake and engaged in routine activities, I would sometimes feel like pressure on my shoulders or upper back or even on my face at times. The sensation was always cold and brief, and it didn't coincide with panic or paralysis or anything like that. I know about sleep paralysis, and this was not that. And on several occasions, while lying in bed, I experienced like a downward pressure, I guess you could say, sustained across my chest, as if weight was being applied unevenly. Mind you, I could still move, but resistance increased when I tried to sit up, and these episodes, they always ended on their own within a few seconds. Importantly too, these sensations never escalated into any injury like my friends did, and they never occurred outside of this house, which, again, is a bit weird. There was also a consistent difference in how the environment seemed to react to different people. Disturbances were more frequent when guests were present, doors were struck at night, tools were moved when nobody was home, and 2 visitors experienced minor physical incidents similar to the ice tray event. Toward me, the activity was limited and I never got injured or anything, which I was thankful for, but other people certainly did, and that always scared me a bit while I was living there. Anyway, by 2021, I stopped trying to interpret the events as external entities. What mattered more was the pattern. A single location, a narrow age range, disrupted sleep, and a house with a documented history of instability. The experiences, they lessened as I spent more time outside the home and stabilized once I began planning to move out. Eventually, I did move out too, and after that, I never experienced anything ever again. Which, to be completely honest, I am very, very thankful for. So I was raised in a pretty conservative religious household, which meant that anything associated with the occult was framed as dangerous but also vaguely taboo. I didn't personally believe in spirits, but I was curious and skeptical in the way that most teenagers really are, right? One evening, I was staying over at a classmate's house. Her name was Mara, and her family practiced a mix of cultural traditions that I didn't fully understand at the time. Late that night, she brought out a spirit board that she said that she had kept in the house for years and was not meant to be used casually. According to her, it was stored away intentionally and only ever brought out during specific rituals. I assumed this was exaggeration meant to build tension or something, but despite that, we decided to try it. This was around 9:30 p.m. and we closed her bedroom door, dimmed the lights, and sat on the floor. There were some candles, but more for atmosphere than ceremony, I thought. Mara insisted on reciting a set of phrases before starting, though, which I later recognized as a grounding exercise mixed with superstition. At the time, I was sort of more focused on proving the whole thing was fake, to be honest. But before we started, she told me that if a specific name appeared, Elena, that we were supposed to stop immediately. She gave a vague explanation about past experiences involving that name. I dismissed it as theatrics at the time. Anyway, we began asking some basic questions. The pointer moved slowly, and I assumed that she was guiding it. The first few answers were generic and pretty forgettable, to be honest. But then, after several minutes, when asked for a name, the letters spelled out Elena. Mara reacted strongly. She pulled her hands away and told me that we needed to end the session properly. She was visibly upset as well, and to calm her down, I sort of agreed. We closed the session, put the board away, and turned the lights back on. Now, what happened next is pretty important because it shows how expectation can override judgment, I suppose, but after stopping, I felt sort of irritated rather than scared, and I believed that Mara had manipulated the board intentionally and staged the reaction and everything. Against her objections, I suggested that we try again, but this time I would write everything down to catch inconsistencies. Well, eventually she agreed, reluctantly, and we repeated the process. The same name appeared, and I asked controlled questions like age, year of death, cause of death, things like this. The answers were specific enough but also vague enough to be interpretable, but not quite, I guess you could say. But the final answer, when I asked who was responsible, spelled a word associated with evil. At that point, the pointer slid off the board and hit the door. This was definitely weird and something that I will never forget because I certainly didn't throw this thing across the room, and I really don't think Mara did either. Afterward, I looked up local crime records on my phone though, and I found a case that partially matched the details. A woman with the first name who had been killed by her partner several years earlier. The connection was pretty loose, but my brain filled in the gaps and confirmation bias did the rest, I suppose you could say. That night, we left the lights on and the television on as well, and we laid down without speaking much. I fell asleep briefly, and woke up suddenly, disoriented, and I experienced something that I will never forget. A sensation of pressure and the impression of someone nearby. I didn't open my eyes. I felt hair brush my face though, which I later realized could have been my own, but I don't think so. I turned over and confirmed that my friend was asleep, so it definitely wasn't her, and when I whispered her name, she replied without turning toward me and told me to stay still and to stay quiet. That was enough to reinforce my fear, so I stayed awake until morning. We never did discuss the event afterward, and after that I avoided her house entirely from that point on. Years later, I still don't know what that was all about. I don't know if it was true or not, or if Mara was moving things, or if it was some sort of an elaborate hoax or what. But I'll never forget that night because it definitely was strange, and I cannot explain everything away, which really is the part that disturbs me the most. This occurred in late March of 2018, during an evening patrol shift in a semi-rural manufactured housing community just outside of Fresno County, California. I was assigned to a 2-officer unit responding to a call categorized as trespassing with possible disturbance. The dispatcher relayed that a homeowner reported an unknown adult female inside of his residence who would not acknowledge him or leave. When we arrived, the caller met us outside of his unit, and he appeared calm but also a little bit shaken. He explained that he had been grilling beside the structure with his teenage son when he noticed movement through a side window. According to him, a woman entered through an unlocked door without hesitation, and he followed her inside and found her standing in the kitchen area, facing the counter, head lowered. He said that her hands were visibly trembling and that she was speaking quietly, but not in a language or a pattern that he recognized. He stated that he raised his voice several times and told her to leave, but she didn't react in any observable way. He said that it was almost as if she was just completely unaware that he was even present. Uncomfortable and unsure how to proceed, he escorted his son outside, and that's when he called the emergency services. We conducted a full search of the residence. The interior was small and uncluttered, and there were no hiding places that would allow an adult to avoid detection. The rear door was partially open, suggesting that she may have exited moments before our entry, but there were no signs of forced entry or damage anywhere. The homeowner declined to pursue charges once we confirmed that she was no longer inside, but I was not comfortable ending the response without locating her at the very least. This was mainly because, based on the description, I believed that she could have been experiencing a psychiatric or medical emergency. We requested an additional unit to canvass the surrounding streets, and we drove toward the nearest access road, which borders this park nearby. And approximately 2 minutes later, we observed a barefoot woman in the gravel shoulder near a drainage ditch, about 40 yards from the roadway. And she matched the description exactly. She was visibly overheated despite the mild weather, sweating heavily and appeared disoriented. She was speaking loudly in fragmented phrases and repeatedly pointing at the ground in front of her, as if responding to something that was not visible to us. Her posture was tense and her movements were very erratic but purposeful. As we exited the vehicle and we attempted to verbally engage her, her behavior escalated. Her speech pattern changed abruptly. Volume, cadence, and tone shifted in a way that suggested either disassociation or extreme agitation. Each time we attempted to move closer, she rotated her head sharply away, refusing eye contact, and she didn't respond to our request for her name when we asked her, and nor did she acknowledge basic orientation questions at all. Concerned about her proximity to the traffic, I attempted to guide her gently away from the roadway using open-handed techniques. And it was at that point that she literally just dropped to the ground without warning and began crawling erratically, spitting and striking the pavement with her hands. At that stage, we transitioned from verbal de-escalation to physical control for safety reasons. The risk of her entering traffic or injuring herself was immediate, and while restraining her, she made sustained eye contact with me for the first time, and her facial expression was so intense but at the same time almost unfocused, consistent with severe psychological distress that she was clearly under. Now, it was at this time, and I will never forget this as long as I live, that she spoke, but it clearly was not her voice. What I mean is that she began screaming and saying random things, but it was like a man's voice. She was a woman though, I mean, she wasn't trans or anything like that. She was a woman, but her voice just completely changed, to the point where it genuinely seemed like we were dealing with another person all of a sudden. My partner continued verbal reassurance while I requested medical assistance. During this period, the woman exhibited intermittent resistance, including baring her teeth and vocalizing nonsensical phrases in this deep voice. Her movements were reactive rather than strategic, and that further indicated a mental health episode rather than criminal intent. But I recall experiencing a really weird and strong sensation of emotional weight during this restraint. Not fear, but a sense of futility, I guess you could say. It was clear that she was not perceiving the situation the way that we were, and this wasn't a confrontation, it was more a containment, I guess you could say. As emergency medical services approached, her physical resistance decreased noticeably, and by the time the paramedics arrived, she was largely nonverbal and allowed herself to be transferred to a gurney without any further struggle. She was then transported under an involuntary psychiatric hold for evaluation. Now, in my career, I had encouraged many individuals experiencing psychosis, substance-induced episodes, and even some trauma responses. But this incident, it has always stood out to me. It was completely unexplainable, and I have no idea how she did that. Again, there was no evidence of criminal intent or any external threat or anything. Everything about the situation, her entry into the wrong home, lack of responsiveness, physical agitation, and eventual collapse, all of it aligned with a severe psychiatric crisis for sure, but I cannot explain how she did that with her voice. The incident reinforced something that law enforcement does not always articulate very well. Not every alarming encounter is dangerous in the way that people expect, because sometimes it really is just simply a person whose internal reality has overtaken their ability to interact with the external world. And that call, well, it changed me for the rest of my life, and it made me question everything. In 2012, my then husband and I purchased a property in Indiana, a neighborhood known for early 20th century homes and declining property values. The house had been on the market longer than average, and during disclosure, the agent informed us that the previous owner had died by suicide inside of the home several years earlier. The death occurred in an upstairs bedroom, apparently. There were no unresolved legal issues or anything, no structural damage, and no visible indicators of the incident anywhere. From a financial perspective, purely, the purchase made sense. The price was well below comparable properties, and the location suggested eventual resale potential as well. So, we proceeded with the purchase without hesitation. The first irregular event, though, occurred during the move-in period. While unpacking kitchen items, I placed several glass tumblers on a laminate countertop near the sink. At some point, while I was in an adjacent room, one of the glasses moved across the surface and struck the far wall of the dining area. There were no vibrations from the appliances, no pets present, and no one else in the house at the time. I attributed it to uneven placement or residual moisture, and I didn't raise the issue any further. Over the following months, smaller issues accumulated though. Our son, who was 2 at the time, began waking repeatedly during the night. Initially, I attributed this to sleep regression or being in a new environment. However, several battery-operated toys in this room began activating on their own. One was a plastic animal that played a recorded phrase when tilted, and after repeated incidences, I removed the batteries. But, and I have no idea how this is even possible, the toy continued to activate. I disassembled it in the end and discarded the internal components. The activation continued intermittently until I disposed of it entirely. Another item, a children's book with a pressure-activated sound chip, produced music while closed on a shelf. This occurred in the presence of visiting adults on at least one occasion, and my friend's mother, who was present during one of those incidences, advised me to leave the house as soon as I could. Her reaction was notable, not because of what she said, but because she had no prior knowledge of the house's history. The most significant incident, though, that occurred approximately 6 months after moving in. So I woke up during the night and realized that my son was not in bed. I heard his voice coming from the kitchen area. From the hallway, I could hear him speaking in short, clear responses, as though answering questions. He had begun talking in some basic phrases by this stage, and I think that he stated either his name or his age or something, and he mentioned that he was sleeping, I think. There was no second audible voice, and when he returned to the bedroom, he appeared calm but insistent that someone had been speaking with him. He kept pointing and describing a person, a woman, he said, or mummy, I think is what he said, and at that time, all of his grandparents were alive and living elsewhere, so I don't really know what that was all about. In any case, I woke up my husband and we searched the house. All doors were locked, no signs of entry were present, and following this incident, I began experiencing reoccurring dreams centered on the upstairs bedroom where the prior death had occurred. These dreams, they were consistent in structure but vague in detail, and aligned with symptoms of prolonged stress and sleep disruption for a long time. I don't claim that I saw anything physically present while I was awake or anything, but these dreams were certainly weird. Over the next year, my marriage deteriorated significantly too, and my husband worked extended hours and developed escalating substance abuse issues. The household environment, it became unstable and at times even unsafe. Eventually, I initiated separation and he moved out of the home, and at that point it was just my son and me living there. Now, several weeks later, while watching television together, my son entered the kitchen and began absolutely screaming. When I reached him, he was visibly distressed and unable to speak coherently for like several minutes. Once calm, he stated that he had seen the mummy again and that her face was weird. He said, "Face not right," or something like that. I didn't ask follow-up questions, and I gathered our belongings and I just left the house that day. We stayed elsewhere for several weeks, and when I returned to retrieve additional items, I found that every electronic device in the house was powered on at maximum volume. This included devices that had been unplugged previously. Mind you, as far as I could tell, no one had been there, and there was no evidence of forced entry, and the locks had been changed months earlier, so it definitely was not my ex. I shut everything off, collected what I needed, and I just left. The house was sold later that year as a part of the divorce settlement, and I didn't disclose any of the events described above beyond what was legally required. I have never experienced anything similar to that before or since then, and when I pass that house now, I always feel a bit of fear. I also feel relief that we left before the situation further impacted my son, but regardless, I was glad to be out of there, and I certainly will not be going back for anything. So, the event itself was brief, but the after effects, sleep disruption, vigilance, and a change to daily routines, they certainly have persisted. I'm not presenting this as proof of anything, but only as an accurate account of what I personally experienced. So at the time, I was living in a semi-rural area in Missouri, where residential roads transition quickly into undeveloped land. My mother, she shared the house with me at the time, and she routinely walked our dog late at night, often without informing me beforehand. This was common enough that hearing her outside after dark was not unusual. Now, on the night in question, I was returning home on foot at about 10:45 p.m. after visiting a friend. I didn't own a vehicle at the time, and the walk was just under 3 miles, and it was pretty familiar to me. The route, it included a slight elevation change and a set of railway tracks that cut through a stretch of unmanaged woodland nearby. On one side of the tracks was the edge of the residential subdivision here, and on the other was a long corridor of trees, bushes, and uneven ground, extending several miles without lighting or buildings. As I approached the tracks, I heard movement coming from the tree line. The sound was consistent with branches shifting or breaking under weight, and my initial assumption was wildlife, likely deer or maybe a dog or something, which were known to pass through the area from time to time. I stopped walking briefly to identify the source, intending to continue once the noise passed. While standing there, I heard my first name spoken aloud, though. The voice was high-pitched and weird, steady and emotionally neutral. It did not sound distressed or urgent or anything, and the cadence was uniform, with each repetition spaced several seconds apart, pretty much exactly. The tone sort of matched the voice that my mother typically used when calling our dog, not when speaking to another adult. The sound originated from within the wooded area, though, roughly 30 to 40 feet off the path. I didn't respond. At first, I assumed my mother might be nearby or something, and unaware that I was approaching from the opposite direction. However, I dismissed this pretty quickly because the circumstances didn't align with her usual behavior. She would not walk the dog that close to the tracks, and she would not call my name repeatedly in that manner, ever. Additionally, I could not hear the dog anywhere anyway, its collar or any of its movements or barking or anything. The voice repeated my name several more times though, each repetition sounding closer, although I didn't hear any footsteps or any movement in the forest or changes in volume or anything that would normally indicate somebody approaching. The consistency of the voice though was notable. There was no variation in the pitch, speed, or inflection. It was almost like it was on repeat. It was at this point that my heart began to race a bit, my muscles tensed, and I also had a bit of an inability to move for about several seconds. I was sort of frozen in fear, I guess. This reaction was involuntary and not something that I had previously experienced in any other situation. I was not under the influence of alcohol or any substances or anything, so I had no idea what was going on. I resumed walking though without acknowledging the voice eventually, and I didn't look toward the tree line again. The remainder of the walk was uneventful, and I reached my house without any further incident. Upon entering the home though, I confirmed that my mother was inside with the dog, and she had not been out recently, and certainly had not been the one calling for me from that forest line. I didn't provide her with a detailed account at the time, but I told her that I had encountered something weird and thought that I had heard her voice at the time, somewhere around those tracks. Afterward, I attempted to rationalize the event. Possible explanations included other persons attempting to get my attention, maybe the acoustics of the forest and somebody out there hollering over and over again or something. Or maybe it was just something that I just couldn't explain. But none of these explanations fully accounted for the specificity of the voice, the use of my name as well, or the absence of visible or audible indicators of a person or an animal. Since that night, I've not taken walks alone after dark there ever again, and my mother adjusted her routine as well. No similar incidences have occurred, and I've not observed suspicious activity in the area since then. I didn't report anything to anyone too, as really there's just not much to it, and I'm not claiming that the experience was paranormal, but I'm equally unable to explain just what it was using ordinary causes. The event was isolated and brief, and it left no physical evidence that I could tell, and so I just really don't know what to make of it. So if you have any ideas as to what this could have been, I would genuinely love to hear what you think. Thanks for listening. I've always grown up around weird, unexplainable experiences, so knowing that moving in with my best friend, who has a lot of weird encounters on her property, really didn't bother me at all. I have been coming around for 5 years before I even started living here, and I only experienced little things like hearing footsteps, the doors opening on their own, basic things like that. I only actually saw something a few times. It was over the summer, and I was basically already living at her house because of how often I was over there. But the following stories are from before I moved in. So, the first time I ever saw it, it was at night, and my best friend, I'm just going to refer to her as my sister from now on, had gone inside of the house to grab something. I was standing on the porch. Dad was out with the dog and a flashlight, so that was how I was able to see it. What I saw was a creature with pale, tight skin that didn't seem to fit all of its bones. It honestly looked a bit like large animal bones shoved inside of human skin. It was crawling on all fours towards the road, so it wasn't facing me. It didn't even acknowledge me. I just watched it until she came back, and then it was gone. It wasn't like any animal or thing that I had ever seen before, though, and I assumed that I was just seeing things, so I didn't tell her until a different night on the porch. She told me that she had seen something before too, and that it has apparently always been around. She never said anything to me either, because she also thought that she was just going crazy, but she described the same thing that I'd seen. At my sister's graduation party, I had gone out to the swing set with this girl. It was just us two. Everybody else was still on the porch or inside of the house, and we were perfectly far away from everyone. We were shouting, screaming, trying to freak them out from where we were, since all we had was a light on, and at the time they didn't realize that we had gone there. It was more like manic laughter, I guess, and witch noises, not actual screaming, so they would know for sure that it was just us. Still a scary thing for a group of cross-faded people to hear, right? Although I was fully sober at this party, so I know what I saw was real. I kept seeing something running around us in what I assumed was circles. I ignored it at first, and me and this girl started talking about getting my sister and her boyfriend at the time, now ex, thank God, to play a trick on the people sleeping in the camper, since we saw them head in for bed like the four of us had planned. But soon after that, we saw a figure walk around the camper and shake it. We assumed that they had got there first and stayed where we were. Eventually, after maybe an hour or so, we were talking about heading back. It was around 2 or 3 in the morning, maybe even 4 at this stage. That's when we looked over and saw a tall human figure walking around the pool. They were too tall and skinny to be anyone that we knew. We tried to think logically and assumed that it was my sister's boyfriend. We decided to walk back, and once we got back onto the porch, my sister's boyfriend ran up the steps toward us and started yelling at us for messing with them. My sister was on the porch and said that she just watched us come off the swing set, so it couldn't have been us. But apparently, we saw what they saw, but someone was underneath the porch poking my sister's boyfriend in the back allegedly. This is obviously something that I didn't witness, but it is what my sister and her boyfriend, Evan, said. He at first didn't believe my sister about what was going on and threatened whatever was outside by saying that he was going to touch it. He was way more detailed than that, but I don't feel like going into detail about what he told this thing. But that was when they both saw it. It had somehow gotten up to the porch and peeked from around the corner at them. My sister said that she was so shocked and terrified at what she saw that she could hardly put together the face of it. She just remembers that it was pale and extremely skinny. Now, when I first moved in and was dropped off at the house, I was pretty much completely alone. I went out into the kitchen to get some food, and that's when I heard my sister's cat, Teslie, meowing. When I got to him, I still heard him meowing, but I was looking at him and he was not meowing or moving his mouth at all. Something told me to look outside, no matter what I heard, and I stayed with him since I assumed that he would be scared too, but I went back into the room and I heard constant footsteps. I knew that it wasn't the cats because I knew what the cats all sound like, and it definitely wasn't them. I also used to sit on the porch at night, pretty much every night, until I would, without fail, every night hear things moving on the porch or something walking around, even though I was completely alone. I would hear voices that I didn't recognize, but I guessed I was hallucinating since any hallucinations that I've ever had have been tame. Normally I would just hear conversations I couldn't make out or something like that, and they stopped after I moved out of my parents' house anyway. I'm assuming that they were caused from stress, but after this I really don't think I was hearing things. It started to get more consistent and obvious recently, like it doesn't care who sees it or hears it. It's like it wants us to pay attention to it or something. The scariest experience, though, was when we were on the porch with our friend. Their name is Sean. We were in a hunting blind and we were smoking together, but I wasn't high or anything, and Sean wasn't high at all. I believe that he has a much higher tolerance than my sister and I, but we were talking about it, mocking it, and just sort of joking about everything that we had seen. My sister stuck her hand outside of the tent and pulled it back in almost immediately while screaming that something had apparently touched or grabbed her hand. I assured her that it was just a bug or something, and honestly, I wanted to believe that it couldn't have been the creature or anything. For a while, we just heard footsteps and such until we all heard a male's voice speaking to us. We couldn't really make out what it was saying, but it was definitely a male voice. I thought it was Dad trying to scare us at first, so I yelled out to it that we could hear it. But there was silence. I continued to insist that it was just Dad messing with us, but nothing happened until we heard the whispering. Now that I think about it too, it did sound a lot like Sean, but I was looking at him and so was my sister. She started crying because she heard the same thing that I did, and so did he. He looked confused though and terrified at the same time because he was not talking at all. After that, the light turned on without anyone being out there. And I mean, we've done jumping jacks practically just to get that light to turn on. It barely ever works, but we packed up everything and immediately went inside after hearing all this. Only a few days ago, we went outside to go into the hunting blind for our activities. We went out of the sliding glass door that time and nothing odd was on the porch. I know because I was trying to ice skate in the kiddie blow-up pool thingy, and I know for a fact that it wasn't there before, but we came back to go inside and we stopped because dead in the center of the porch was a chunk of fresh raw meat wrapped in newspaper. We were on FaceTime with someone and he also saw it, but he insisted that we must have missed it, but I know that we couldn't have. It had been snowing and we were outside long enough for it at least to have been covered in snow. In any case, we went inside and asked Dad about it, and we have absolutely no newspaper, and nobody in the house would have wasted meat for a prank that didn't even get a scream out of us. The newspaper it wasn't even wet either, which was weird. Only maybe a day before that incident too, we saw these large footprints right in front of our bedroom window after being on our way inside after hunting, blind activities and all that. Nobody's shoes looked like that. They were long and thin and a bit like a clown shoe foot or whatever. They didn't lead anywhere and there was no trail, just one set in the middle of nowhere. The weird thing though is that they didn't lead anywhere and they were not trails from anywhere either. They were just one set in the middle of nowhere. Well, we just simply went inside and assumed that we must have missed it when we came out, but I know for sure that we didn't because I tried to grab my sign that fell by our window, but I decided to leave it since it was already covered in snow. My sister also knows that they weren't there before either because she apparently checked there as well. And to add insult to injury, we don't have a curtain, which was very fun to think about. Now, the house isn't that old, but the property sure has a lot of history. I'm not entirely sure what I was told, but the property could be haunted because of all the horrible things that happened here allegedly. People have died in this house, and sometimes things do act up, like Thanksgiving night, for example. I was in my bedroom by myself. My sister was in the bath and her nephew was trying to sleep on the couch. I heard the sound of someone walking in and out of the house, doors opening and shutting, just a whole lot of strange things, and her nephew heard it all too, and claimed that he had seen things staring through the window, watching him sleep. We don't really talk to him about what we've seen, but he described exactly what we have, multiple times as well. But my sister, she said that she had heard someone knock on the door and her younger sister shout, "Mum." Mum was clearly asleep on the bed and she wouldn't have done that since it could wake her up. This was around midnight since she texted me about it when it happened, since at first she thought that it could have been me, but also knew that I wouldn't make that much noise while Mum was asleep. Our sister was asleep at that time too, and there were no footsteps or anything at all, even though you would be able to hear someone walking up to the door like that. Another time, most recently, we were messing around with a Ouija board. I know, kinda stupid, but it's only worked for me once and it didn't work this time, so I spelled out something stupid and threw it across the room without saying goodbye. Later that night, I swear that I saw a little boy running into our aunt's bedroom. I went outside to tell my sister what I saw, and thankfully we didn't have anything happen related to that kid after that. We did randomly get a strong feeling though that we were being watched, or to not look outside or into the yard or whatever. I've never been afraid of the dark, but I've had these feelings before at my parents', so I'm really not sure what else to think or feel. And well, really, that's about it. Obviously, more things are probably going to happen, and if they do, I'll be sure to update all of you guys. By the way, I saw it again the last night through my window, the thing outside specifically. I don't think whatever's outside is related to anything that happens inside, weirdly enough, but it was tall and it was too dark to see anything more than a silhouette. It looked to be maybe about 6 feet at least, and it had longish fingers or claws, I guess you could say. I don't know, but they looked sharp. I looked at it for a good minute and it didn't go away, so I don't think it was my mind playing tricks on me or anything. At first I thought it was a reflection of everything in my room on the window since there was some TV light. I left to go to the bathroom and I came back to my sister in the bedroom with the light on, and I could clearly see the reflection in the window, and that's when I knew that it couldn't have been anything in the room making a shape like that. Not long after, my sister left again, and I saw it put its hand in front of the window while I was sending a voice note to some of my friends who know what's been going on here. It even tapped on the window 3 times. My sister came back and I immediately asked her if she had heard it or was tapping or something. I got up and looked out the window to find, well, absolutely nothing. After that, I sat back down and we sat in silence for a few minutes until we heard movement, and a sort of backwards whistling is the best way to describe it. After that, nothing else happened, and if it did, we just ignored it anyway. This hasn't happened before, but my sister doesn't seem that freaked out by it. I'm not sure if I am either, to be honest, but I guess it just sort of feels normal at this point. Although, I will say this event does seem to be a bit of an escalation in what's been happening. I'm sorry if this is a bit of a long one, but there have been a few strange happenings in my life in the past 24 hours, and I feel like there's a lot of background info needed for all of it to make any sense. So to begin, both of my parents are dead. I'm 24, female now, but my mum passed when I was 15 and my dad just 9 months later when I was 16. Mum passed in a car accident, and Dad, well, he ended his own life. My dad was a firefighter for most of his life, and both parents struggled with addiction. I'm not sure how relevant that is, but just so you have all of the info, I think it's worth knowing. So, here's where it really starts. I was standing in the corner of my kitchen this morning, huge open floor plan, so my back was to the rest of the apartment. I was making myself some breakfast when I hear what is distinctly a man taking a deep breath or a sigh. It sounded like it was right behind me, so I spun around. Obviously, nothing was there though. It's early morning, my cats were sleeping upstairs and wouldn't be able to make that noise regardless. No electronics were on at all because my roommate and I unplugged them last night due to a lot of thunderstorms in our city. My roommate was asleep and he sleeps with tape over his mouth. Don't ask, he's a mouth breather, so he couldn't have made the noise either. Not to mention that his room is on the other side of the kitchen, not behind me. I genuinely have no idea what could have made that noise, other than some kind of an entity, really. After that, I finish getting ready and I go to work. I tell my co-workers what happened, and I started to kind of piece together some other things that have been going on lately and connect them a bit. For example, last night at work, I got 2 phone calls within 5 minutes of each other, and both of them just said goodbye in a man's voice and hung up. My roommate also left a candle burning in the shared bathroom overnight, and my dad, the firefighter, spent my whole life drilling fire safety into my head. But yesterday, I was going through a bunch of my things and spring cleaning essentially, and ended up finding a few of my dad's things that I've never seen before. Even though I've gone through these things dozens of times in the almost 8 years that he's been gone now. But I found a very cryptic note with things written on it like despair, pain, loneliness, darkness, etc. And at the bottom, my name was written and circled. I also found a cassette recorder with my dad's voice on it. I've been getting splitting headaches for the last 2 days too, when I normally don't get them at all. The noise itself sounded like it came from the corner directly behind me, and the only things there are a wax warmer and one of my dad's old bottles from his house, which has its own very creepy backstory. But lastly, to get to my apartment, you have to walk up a stairwell that has motion sensor lights. For the past couple of days, the light has been flickering just non-stop. So, all of that by itself, while still very alarming, could be kind of ignored. But then I get home from work today, open the door to the stairwell. The light is still flickering until I'm standing directly below it, because as soon as I get underneath it, it stops flickering and is working normally. I stood there for almost a full minute and took a video of it to show my roommate, and the second that I turned around to keep going up the stairs, it started to flicker again. I really don't know what to make of any of this or where to go from here, so any advice or thoughts as to all of this genuinely would be greatly appreciated. Unlike a lot of stories on here, I don't have any evidence, and most of the situations happen months, even years, apart. So, truthfully, I have no idea if they are really connected or not. I would love to know what you guys think might be going on though, because I'm starting to feel slightly, well, crazy, I guess. My first weird encounter happened when I was in elementary school. I can't remember what grade specifically, but I was definitely young. My older brother, Jay, and I invited our neighbors Mike and Pay over for a Friday sleepover. My parents ended up hitting the hay early that night, around 9 p.m., so the four of us decided to take advantage of the mainly unoccupied house and play an old game of hide-and-seek in the dark. For reference, I used to live in a one-story house that was built in the 70s, so the windows were really low and easy to look through if you tried to. My window in my bedroom, it was positioned on the side of the house, diagonal from a pesky streetlight that always seemed to perfectly shine into my window every single night. I didn't own curtains, but I did have blinds on my window, and I always kept them shut to try and help block out some of the light. Anyway, it was Mike's turn to count. My brother Jay, Pay, and I, we all decided to hide. I ended up shoving myself into my crowded and messy closet, which had one of those big folding doors. Because of the fact that my closet had 1,000,001 things in it, I didn't fit very well too. The door wasn't able to fully shut. At the time, I really didn't mind though, because it gave me a little bit of a slit between the door that I could peek through. 1 minute turned into 5 when everyone eventually got found, aside from me. Mike was starting to grow impatient, so he asked Jay and Pay to help him find me. That's when Pay, like the genius she is, ended up flinging my closet door open with an accomplished grin on her face. I don't remember much, other than me complaining that she was cheating, before my eyes drifted past her head and toward my bedroom window behind her. I remember my blood ran cold, because the silhouette of a man with a hand literally cupped to the window, as if he was trying to peek in, was enough to scare the ever-loving out of me. I screamed a blood-curdling scream, which only caused Pay to turn on her heels to try and see what had me so frightened. It took all but 3 mere seconds before her screams joined mine, and we both gripped onto each other and full-on sprinted into the living room. I nearly stumbled into my older brother's hands while my parents raced out of the bedroom. I ended up explaining to them through choked tears that there was a man outside of my window. My older brother and stepdad grabbed a flashlight and a knife and checked every perimeter outside. They even went as far as checking our surrounding neighbors' backyards and down the street too. But there was nothing. Nobody. Literally, the street was dead quiet. And, just as a side note, I remember very clearly that it was pouring down rain that night, so it would be incredibly hard for anyone to escape quickly without leaving sunken footsteps in the mud, and without the sound of heavy shoes slapping against wet earth. But fast forward many, many years, and at this point, I'm 19 years old and I end up moving in with my girlfriend and her family. Just to add in too, I know it doesn't typically mean much, but the feeling of being watched, always having unknown company hovering behind me, has been a feeling that I've felt for over a decade now. Sometimes I feel like it's just in my head and, I don't know, I'm just sort of psyching myself out. But other times, the feeling just feels so real. Like, I just cannot shake it. Like my body is trying to alert me that I'm not alone. And the more I ignore my body and its warnings, the louder it screams. Anyway, I'm 19 now, like I said, living with my girlfriend and her family. One night I decided that I absolutely needed a midnight snack. My girlfriend had already been knocked out of sleep along with her younger brother and her parents, so I went downstairs, clutching onto the collar of her American bulldog, because, just like so many times before, I felt the unease of not being alone. For reference, to get to the kitchen, you have to come eye to eye with their sliding glass door that leads to their backyard. And let me be clear too that I am 100% certain that that night, the door was shut and locked. 10,000% certain of it, in fact. I ended up making myself a PB&J, when a shiver literally racks through me. I ignore it, of course, and finish making my sandwich and clean up the mess that I made before turning around to head back upstairs. I end up turning just to stare at a half-open sliding glass door. Obviously, I immediately jumped into, oh my goodness, there's a human in the house right now. So I ran over to the door and shut it, and locked it before checking out the entire downstairs. But in the end, there wasn't a single soul other than me and the dog. I literally cannot explain how that happened. Even to this day, it fills me with a sense of just unease. When I woke up the next morning too, I asked my girlfriend's parents if they could have forgotten to lock the door. They stared at me with confused looks before reassuring me that they always double-check that all the doors are locked every single night. Now, this next situation happened maybe a few months later. My girlfriend and I decided to take a weekend trip back down to my hometown to visit some friends and family. Basically, we joined my one friend at a bonfire that was being hosted at her grandmother's house. To quickly explain it too, her grandmother lived on a pretty big plot of land in the middle of nowhere, where the only thing that's surrounding her are back roads, a cornfield, and a thick bundle of trees lining her backyard. Now, my girlfriend wanted to be silly and decided to leave the bonfire and sprinted a little over 150 feet to lay on her back a few feet from the lining of the trees. My friend and I ended up just sort of staring at her, waiting for her to pull one of her stupid jokes, when we hear an utterly bone-chilling scream erupting from the forest. I have never seen my girlfriend get up and run so quickly. When she got back to us, she was shaking like a leaf with eyes wider than the moon itself. I've been with my girlfriend for 4 years and I've never known her to be a liar, and she swore on specific things that she loved that there was something that screamed at me just a few feet away in the trees. She said, though, that she didn't see anyone or hear anything else. It was just dead silent when all of a sudden the scream ripped through the air, and it sounded so terrifying that it even unnerved my friend's parents and grandma. This third situation happened not long ago. My girlfriend ended up having to work a 24-hour at the fire station, so it was just me, the little brother, and the parents at home. Just like the last time, my grumbling stomach kept me from being able to fall asleep that night. So with a sigh of defeat, I got up and went downstairs to grab some food. When I came back up, I was fiddling with trying to lock the puppy gate at the top of the stairs when I heard, in a deep gravelly whisper, someone whispering my name, sort of all drawn out. I nearly jumped out of my skin when I heard it, and quickly set my plate of food on the ground so that I could pull my phone's flashlight up and shine it toward the other end of the hallway. And again, surprise, surprise, there was nothing and nobody. I was completely alone in a dead silent hallway, so there was zero chance of me mistaking the noise to be a TV or something, as there were no TVs or no noise whatsoever there. I did end up peeking my head into her parents' room and her little brother's room. They were all sound asleep, drool and all. I ended up texting my girlfriend about it that night because I just was completely freaked out. When I woke up the next morning, I read that she texted me freaking out at 6 a.m. because she was changing in the girls' bathroom at the fire station when she heard a whisper, and she explained that it sounded exactly like how mine did, and said hi to her all drawn out like. Honestly too, I cannot even explain what that means or what it could be, but it's safe to say that I'm never going to get midnight snacks alone ever again. Now, this final thing happened just a week ago. I didn't experience it myself, but my girlfriend did. So we were downstairs in the middle of the day talking to her mum. The hallway has the bathroom and the front door is connected to the kitchen, so if you stand in the middle of the kitchen, you can see perfectly down in. My girlfriend randomly lurched forward into the hallway and smacked the wall right next to the bathroom door. I turned around and gave her a sort of confused look because, well, there was nobody there. I watched as she peeked her head into the bathroom, looking like she was expecting someone to be there, when she quickly ducked back out and hurried back toward me. She explained that she turned around and saw the quick motion of a white sleeve or arm moving into the bathroom, as if her little brother quickly ducked into the bathroom to try and hide and scare her, and she ended up catching his sleeve in the action. Yet, her little brother was at school that day, and her father was in the living room with us. In other words, there was absolutely nobody else in the house other than us four, and everybody was accounted for. Like I said, I have no idea if these are all linked in some way, if there's something that's been following me since I was a child. I'm really not sure. I've never seen any figures myself, just have heard very unexplainable things that are definitely real. But I don't know. What do you guys think? I've always had bad luck with entities. I don't want them around by any means, but I've had more encounters than most. And a lot of them, they are just downright terrifying. Though this particular one was traumatizing to say the least. I'll try to keep this as short as I can, as I'd rather not give all the details. So, I was about 15 when I went with my two friends to an abandoned mental asylum. The oldest of us drove us there, and we got the pin from a friend of a friend. I tried to look up where it was located, hoping to find some history, and this place apparently didn't exist according to Google. So I was a bit nervous and had a bit of a bad feeling about this one. We drive down this overgrown dirt road at one point and see a very large building. We enter and there's a lot of medical equipment and beds were still there. We headed upstairs. This place was pure stone, by the way. Nothing was broken or anything, and it was like everything just sort of disappeared. We entered a room which we quickly figured out was an old morgue. We were talking, taking photos, etc. And I remember feeling like something was watching me as soon as I entered that room, though my friends were laughing and telling me to loosen up a bit. When all of a sudden, I hear heavy footsteps behind me running across the room. Honestly, at first I thought I was crazy, but then I noticed that the others had heard it too. We were absolutely terrified at this point, freaking out and looking every which way. I got out my hot pink taser, in which I still have, and started yelling, trying to look intimidating. I remember hearing one of the medical machines knock over and my friend screaming, but my eyes could not look away from the door that was completely dark. I remember hearing those heavy footsteps coming toward us at full speed, and then stopping. All I hear after that is, "Hey kiddo, how was your day at school?" I remember my heart stopping. I didn't see anything, and I didn't stick around to find out either. We ran all the way out without any question. We got in the car safely, thank God, but when we were well away from the place, my friend turned to me and said, "What was that?" I really don't remember what I said. In fact, I don't think I said anything in the end. I never told them the truth that that was actually my dad's voice. You see, my dad died a year ago at that point, and I just didn't know what to think about it. In fact, I never told anyone what really happened that day. So I've always loved scary stuff, films, books, and games, but never believed in anything paranormal. I'll admit that I'd had some weird stuff happen, but I'd ignore it and shrug it off. I mean, there must be a rational explanation. But then, a few years ago, my friend wanted to do one of those paranormal ghost hunts that was taking place in our local area. I thought, you know what, why not? I've watched loads of TV ghost hunts and all that. It'll probably be fun. And it was for the most part. The building we went to had a really horrible history, but there was a big roaring fire and comfy seats, and the atmosphere was cozy rather than scary. They even fed us loads of tasty food as well. It felt like we had gathered around to tell scary stories. Honestly, I never felt frightened once. A couple of strange things happened, and a spirit box clearly said my name, but that definitely wasn't evidence of the paranormal. I put it down to coincidence. In the middle of the night, the investigators got a Ouija board out, though, and asked for some volunteers. My friend and another person in the group wanted to do it, so I decided to join too. It started spelling out words almost immediately too, and I didn't pay much attention to what it said because I was so focused on watching the other two to catch them out moving the pointer. I wasn't moving it, so obviously it had to be one of them. Except, I was paying such close attention that I realized that there were times only my finger was touching the pointer and it still moved. I didn't understand how and asked to look at the board at the end because I was convinced that there must be magnets or something on there. As soon as it was done, out of nowhere I realized I was really tired, just totally exhausted. One of the people in charge of the group, who said that he was a psychic, seemed really concerned, and I had to reassure him I just wasn't used to being up that hour. I'd been up since before 6 a.m. and it was now 4 a.m.-ish, so I just wanted my bed and chose to leave early. I got home, gave my dog some attention, and I went to sleep. But it was the next morning that I heard some weird noises that seemed to be coming from the door when I was in the bathroom. I thought it was quite weird, but I just sort of ignored it. Probably a draft or vibration from somewhere. I went into my bedroom and started getting dressed for the day. Heard my dog being silly on the other side of the bed behind me. He was a GSD and very big, so he was making quite a bit of noise. Sounded like he was digging under my bed, in fact. I turned around to talk to him and see what he was doing, and when I did, he wasn't there. I checked under the bed and all around the room, but nothing. In fact, my dog was downstairs the entire time. This actually freaked me out because I definitely know what I heard. Over the next couple of weeks too, I checked for mice because, what else could it have been? This is when smaller things started to happen though. From stuff like being certain I saw something move on the other side of the room in the corner of my eye, to strange noises. Sometimes things would just fall. A book falling off the table or a stack of plates clattering on the drying rack. I ignored a lot of this. Like, oh, I just heard a plate hit against another plate in the kitchen. Must be a draft in there or something. Other stuff, though, I really couldn't explain. Like, once, I was home alone and I just cleaned around the house and had been chilling on the sofa watching some TV, when I decided to get a drink or whatever. I walked into the kitchen and saw some fruit roll through the length of the counter. The fruit bowl is really tall and, there's no way any fruit would just jump out like that. It was only about a third of the way full as well. Nobody else was in the kitchen and really, I just could not explain that one. And then some things that happened were, just downright frightening. You see, I'd been home alone and I'd hear someone walking around upstairs. It was a different sound to the usual creaks, I know that much. More than once, I woke up to my dog standing in the doorway of my bedroom growling. He was never much of a growler, and that really terrified me. I would always go and check, expecting an intruder, but there was never anyone there. The worst thing by far, though, that happened was the last. It was a weekend morning, really bright and sunny. I woke up super early that morning, let my dog outside, and we went back up to bed. I had a coffee and a book, and I was just planning on chilling out for a bit. After a bit, my boy jumped off the bed and looked out of the bedroom doorway, then just sort of laid down, so I went back to my coffee and book. And out of nowhere, there was the loudest crash that came from the loft. I jumped, my dog jumped up, and then it sounded like something was falling down the loft staircase. There was noise of running up and down the stairs, and honestly, it was like all hell broke loose. I could have sworn, based on the noise, that there were at least 20 people up there just throwing things as hard as they could off the floor and the walls, kicking things and running around like crazy. I could hear things smashing, and it went on for a while as well. I was absolutely mortified and terrified, and I could have sworn that there were people up there. I heard running on the stairs but couldn't see anyone, and when it stopped, neither of us dared move. I didn't take my eyes off the stairs, and eventually I went up with my phone ready to call emergency services, but there was nobody there, and the weirdest thing was, there was nothing out of place. Honestly, I have no explanation for any of that. I shared this elsewhere, and someone reached out and told me to ignore it as best as I could and it would go away. And it did, and this was years ago. I'm in the same house though, and recently I've had a few more weird experiences happen that has left me feeling unsure whether or not it's actually gone or not. I have read somewhere that weird experiences can restart any time, and that honestly really freaks me out. But has anyone else had a long break and things start up again? The stuff that happened before just doesn't even seem real to me, but I know it happened. I don't want it to come back, and if there's something that I can do, then honestly, please do share with me, because this is all just a bit too much. So, I had this experience last week. I won't go into too much detail, but my brother, his wife and son were going out for a meal at a well-known buffet in London. Before leaving, they said their goodbyes, etc. Nothing strange there, until the doorbell rang and he came back an hour or so later, which I immediately felt odd about, as the drive to the buffet place is at least 30 minutes minimum, meaning that they would have to drive 30 minutes each way and only eat for 30 minutes. I didn't question it at first. My brother came in when I opened the door and said that he was full, and it looked like he was waiting for his wife and son to come in from the car. Well, so it seemed. Anyway, I turned around and went upstairs back to my room. About 20 minutes later, I got a WhatsApp message from my brother telling me that he's finishing up dessert and will be leaving in 20 minutes. I assumed that he was going out again elsewhere for dessert, as I guess the buffet dessert wasn't good enough, so told him to leave the key out when he leaves so that he can let himself back in. And that's where the confusion came in. He said, "What do you mean? I'm at the buffet and you already locked the door when I left, didn't you?" Honestly, I thought that he was joking at first, and came downstairs to double check, and I noticed the front door was left open. I rushed to the door and locked it immediately, and checked the Ring doorbell app to make sense of everything. But there were no doorbell press alerts and no motion alerts recorded either. Both me and my wife heard the doorbell though, and I definitely let someone or something in. Checking my brother's room after I got his permission, there was no one there or in any other rooms in the household. A week has gone by since then, and no other strange occurrences so far, but honestly, let's hope it stays that way. This encounter happened a few months ago. For context, I, 18-year-old male, live about 1.5 kilometers away from a shopping center, or just under a mile. The route that I take usually requires me to turn 2 corners and walk straight for the rest of the journey. Although pretty early on in the walk, there is a tall apartment block to the left of the pathway along the main road. I would say it was about 4 or 5 levels, and you had to pass it too. Now, I live in a shady area, and previously the apartment block, it had a case of a stabbing that killed a woman a year before my story takes place. I even witnessed the cleanup crews hosing the area down when that happened. It was pretty horrific if you ask me. But this caused me to be pretty wary of the area in general. On this day in particular, I needed to go to the shopping centre to pick up a couple of supplies. I noticed as I started walking the pathway of the straight road that the sky was pretty dark that evening. It was early in the afternoon, so this meant that a storm was probably on the way. Not a drop of rain fell as I made my way to the shop, though. Once I had arrived, I picked up what I needed and went window shopping for a while. When I was satisfied, I exited through the door that I had originally entered and began walking back home. I made it to the final set of traffic lights that was probably about a 7-minute walk away from my house. The rain started to trickle at first, and then after that it poured pretty heavily. 3 minutes later, I could see the apartment block about 20 meters ahead to the right. The rain was still pouring down, and so the visibility wasn't that great. But what I could make out was a man in a dark green poncho. He had the hood of the poncho over his head and a big grin on his face for some reason. As I got closer and closer to him, I didn't like the feeling that I was getting. All of a sudden, too, he reached his arms out almost as if he was attempting to bring me into his embrace, keeping that same smile he had before. The man was about 5 meters distance from me when I took the opportunity to cross onto the median strip of the main road. I noticed his glance followed me as I crossed into the middle grassy patch, and even though there was no traffic, he decided not to chase me down and continued walking along the pathway as he kept eye contact with me. Eventually I got inside, and he must have left after some time because I didn't see him again. The thought, though, of what might have happened if I had walked into his arms still frightens me today. Even if he didn't mean any harm and was not trying to grab me, I still didn't like the vibe that I got from this guy. And when I reached the middle of the road, I definitely felt safer and relieved, especially considering that he didn't attempt to follow behind me or whatever. But I don't know, I definitely am going to be keeping my head on a swivel for quite some time after this because something tells me that this may not be over. Several things happened in this house, but I'll try to make this as quick as I can and just give you a few stories, because honestly, I could be here all day. So my brother and I wanted to be roomies again, and decided to move into a cute 2-story 3-bedroom house. It was me, my brother, my nephew, my dog, and their tortoise. As we were moving into the house, I was putting boxes in the little closet. It was under the stairs, and I was just thinking that this could be the tortoise's little hangout spot. As I was leaning into the closet to slide a box in, I hear a loud, audible growling directly in my ear. I said nope to that and closed the door. I looked around to see if my dog was nearby, but she was outside, so that was weird. I probably should have known right then that there was something wrong, but I guess I just forgot about it. One unfortunate thing was that my dog just acted really strange in that house, always. For example, a couple of times we would come home from work and she would just be terrified for no reason. We couldn't even get close to her without her whimpering, crying out, and cowering down. Mind you, she's never been afraid of us, and we were never abusive to her, so this was really off. We were wondering if it was possible that the landlord didn't change the locks, or maybe they were letting themselves in and someone kicked her, hit her, or hurt her for some reason out of protecting our home. She is a very protective dog, so she would have barked and acted aggressive towards some stranger coming into the house without us there. Another thing that really got to me was I caught her several times just sort of staring and growling at the upper right corner of my bedroom. Sometimes she would also wag her tail, sit, and raise her paw like she was taking commands from someone, but mostly it was just aggressive growling and showing teeth. It was very odd because she's never done that before or since we left that house. She never showed any of this sort of behavior before or after that house, and I've had her for 10 years. The random growling episodes really freaked me out too because it was just so unlike her. But I tried to tell myself that maybe she was just getting old and her sight was not that great anymore. But one day, my on and off again boyfriend showed up randomly in the middle of the night. We weren't on the best of terms, and I was hesitant, but I allowed him to stay the night because he was drunk and didn't need to drive any more than he already had. I woke up the next day for work and just let him stay there. While I was gone, he was just hanging out in my room, and he said that he got this really weird feeling, and then my bedroom door just slammed hard. At first I was like, well, there must have been a breeze. But then he explained that after the door slammed, he saw a huge black shadow thing in the upper right corner of my room and stated that this house was haunted, which was really unlike him. He didn't believe in that kind of thing. I'm sure I went pale when he said that because I never told him anything about my dog's weird growling episodes, and of course it was the exact same spot. Normally, I would have written it off as just maybe a hallucination from alcohol withdrawal or something like that, but him pointing to that spot made me realize that I was dealing with some sort of a psycho demon. And then, one day, I saw it. I was just sitting in my room, and from my room, I could see the wall and the banister of the stairs. And I got this weird feeling, which I assume was what my ex-boyfriend felt that day, like when you get bad news and your heart drops to your stomach. And then I saw this huge black shadow cascade down the wall and the banister of the stairs. I just sat there in complete terror, watching this thing come down the wall toward me. And look, I know I sound absolutely insane when I say this, but it's like I could just feel that it was on a mission and had intentions to get to me and, well, take over me, like possess me. I was horrified, but I went into fight mode. I wasn't a religious person, and I had no idea what the heck I was doing. If I'm being honest, I just said things that I saw in movies. I started saying things like, "You're not welcome here. Only love and light are welcome in this home. The power of Christ commands you to leave." And when I began saying that last part, again, it was like I could feel its fear and hesitation, and it started slinking back up the wall the same way that it had come down. A few other things to note too is that all of us, even the dog, were just absolutely depressed in that house. It was like we were all shells of our former selves. We acted different. We had no energy, we had no social life outside of work. I was having suicidal thoughts, and I have never had them before or since then. I was having nightmares constantly. I lost so much weight for no reason at all, too. My brother and I were having really heated arguments when we've always gotten along well, and lived together both before and after this house without any issues. We are both very healthy people and never really get sick, but both my brother and I got very sick with very odd illnesses that nobody could diagnose. I was even hospitalized at one point, and the doctors didn't know how to diagnose me. It may seem a bit uneventful to the people listening to this, but man, the scary moments were very scary, but the mental torment for almost 2 years was honestly the worst of it all. It was a daily battle. It's hard to explain, but I think back to that time and I almost want to cry because it's like I can feel the way I felt back then. The depression and horrible negative headspace that I was in, almost like a messed up case of nostalgia. Thank goodness we were able to cut our lease early and leave. And once we moved into a new house, everything went back to normal and we were all our happy selves again. In those based on true events movies, where people move into a haunted house and it slowly drives them crazy, well yeah, I believe it now because I've lived it. The house that I currently live in, I've lived in perfectly fine for 6 years now, but I've seen, felt, and heard things in this house. So about 5 years ago, my now ex-husband, his name is Joe, was leaving for work early one morning and he shut the door. After he shut the door, I heard his name being called in the laundry room, which was where he went out, and also right beside the master bedroom. The really creepy part about it, though, is that it was my voice, and I immediately got chills. After that, our oldest son, who was just crawling at the time, had this sort of VTech phone that he would play with. Somehow it ended up in the corner of our living room, and we had a recliner that sat in front of that corner. I didn't know the phone was back there until it started going 666 over and over again. Please keep in mind, though, that this toy was off at the time, so I picked it up and I threw it outside in the trash. Later, Joe got home and I told him about it, and he laughed and told me that I was probably just hearing things. Fast forward a couple of hours, I was in the shower and he comes in telling me that he needs to talk to me. So I ask about what, and he said that he didn't want to talk inside, he wanted to talk outside. I get out of the shower and put some clothes on and step outside with him, and he tells me that he was taking the trash out, and when he lifted the lid to the trash can outside, the toy, it went off saying 666, and when he looked at it, he confirmed that it was definitely off. I've also felt like I'm being watched. I've heard things moving. I've heard my kids when they aren't even there. Another strong occurrence was after Joe and I split. He came over to see our kids, and I still had the same recliner that the phone was behind, but I got another recliner and had it on the other corner, both facing the TV. He sits in the left one if you're facing the TV, and I sit in the right, and shortly after he sits down, there were 3 knocks on the front door. So he looks at me, and I get a really bad feeling. He goes to open the door, and I told him not to. He does anyway, and there's no one there. So he sits back down, and a few minutes later, there are 3 knocks on the wall behind him. He looks at me wide-eyed, and I just stare at him in a "I told you" type of way. So 30 or so minutes go by, and we ended up switching recliners, just because we were both up, and now he sits in the right recliner. In the living room, I also had my kid's toy box, and one of the toys that always sat on the floor is like the big square things that you see at doctor's offices with the colourful wire and the beads on it. Well, it literally picked itself up about a foot off the ground and slammed itself on the floor. And at that, his face goes white and he looks at me, and I said, "They don't like you." He left shortly after that. Now, my ex-husband also told me that he left the house one night because he had seen something, like a dark figure, and things got really bad, like it would let us leave and some paranormal activity type stuff would happen, but I really don't remember that too much. I have been having the feeling, though, that something bad is going to happen, and sometimes I just don't feel safe there. But I don't know if anyone has experienced this, and if anyone thinks it could be malicious or just a ghost that's harmless, I would really like to know what I should do next, because I'm sort of in 2 minds, I guess. So, I have very bad insomnia, which leads me to staying awake most nights. And this happened a couple of weeks ago. So we recently changed the flooring in the house from regular carpet to wooden flooring. As a result, from our walls being thin and my new door not fitting properly, I can pretty much hear everything going on in the house crystal clear at the moment. I was laying down trying to sleep, and it must have been around 2:30 or 3 in the morning. My dad had already left for work, and my sister was asleep at this point, so was my dad's wife and my little brother. The thing is, though, is that my little sister's door makes this sort of loud creak when it opens, and I can always hear any door in the house opening since it's a small house and my room is almost in the middle. Well, as I'm laying there with the house dead silent, suddenly there's this sort of, I don't know, like shuffling sound coming from the living room, which is just outside of my room. It's just going in circles around the living room too. It's not footsteps, it's some sort of shuffling or weird noise. The closest sounds that I can describe it is when my little brother, when he gets upset and instead of walking like normal, he sort of shuffles his feet by not taking footsteps and instead sliding his feet across the wooden floor. The other sound that is sort of similar to what I heard is that when I wear my jeans without shoes, the length of them is too long for me, but that's how I like them, and that, however, makes it so that even when I take a step in the jeans, they don't go off the floor and they sort of drag and create a shuffling noise. That is pretty much what this sounded like. So, I keep hearing a sort of shuffling noise, and it's not consistent. It kind of shuffles for a bit, then stops, then shuffles again. And it does this for some time, just doing circles in the living room. The kitchen is tile, so there would be no shuffling in there, but I thought when I first heard it, great, rats are in the house. But no, it doesn't seem to go to the tiles, it just kept shuffling around in circles in the living room. It gets worse too, because then I start to hear it shuffling closer to the hallway where my door is at. Now, my little brother will sometimes run down the hallway with his fingers and nails on the wall, so I know what it sounds like when someone is running, or a hand or nails or whatever against the wall. And since my room wall makes up part of the hallway wall, it resonates loudly in my room. Whatever it is though, it starts slowly running fingers or something across the wall, slowly moving it to my door. It's moving its body, or what sounds like a hand, across the hallway's wall slowly until it reaches my door. Then it goes quiet for what feels like a couple of minutes. I think to myself, whatever. It has just stopped and it's gone away anyway, so I should get some sleep. But that was when I hear something scratching at my door. It's not fast or frantic scratching. It's slow, purposeful scratching, just slow scratching from the top of the door to the bottom and repeating itself. After a while of that happening, I then hear it shuffling back to the living room. It then quickly turned into a cycle. It would just shuffle around in the living room, then after a while it would scratch the wall to my room and scratch at my door, then back to the living room again. This cycle kept repeating until sometime into the morning, when I started seeing the first sign of light, and basically as soon as the first sign of light came, I mustered up the courage to leave my room and check. But when I did, there was nothing there. All the doors were locked, and like I said, my room is in the dead middle of the house. The walls are thin and my door doesn't fit properly, so I can hear any of the doors open. It's something that I've grown used to. I would have been able to hear if anyone opened one of those doors, but that never happened. So I know for a fact that it wasn't one of them. My hunch is that it was probably just a big rat, but I don't know any rat on the west coast that would just shuffle around the living room like that, scratch the wall slowly, stop at my door, scratch at it for a bit, then repeat the cycle over and over again. Plus, rats can't reach that high. But whatever it was, it freaked me out real bad, and I'm not the type to get scared easily by any means. Whatever it was, it genuinely shook me to my core. Before I start, I just want to say that I haven't really told many people this, mostly because it was a very scary experience for me and I really don't like to relive it. Anyway, this happened in Kelowna, Canada in the 80s. I was about 14 and was babysitting at a neighbor's house while the parents were gone. They had a really nice house too, like most in the neighborhood, and it was right on the corner where two streets connected. My house was right outside of a bus stop, across from theirs. This happened pretty late at night in the winter, so it was dark out, maybe 11 or 12 at night. I was sitting on the couch when I thought that I saw something at the back door. It was one of those glass doors that led to the porch, and it was weird though because I really couldn't see too much. But you know when the lights are on and it's dark out, so you can't really see anything but black and your reflection? Well, that's sort of what I saw, but I could have sworn that it looked like something was there. So I got up and I walked close to the window. It definitely looked like something was there, but I just still couldn't really see it. I got closer and closer, still couldn't see. I honestly should have just turned on the lights, but instead I put my face right to the glass and cupped my hands by my eyes to look out. And maybe about 1 inch from my face, on the other side of the glass, was a man. He looked tall and pale from what I could see, which wasn't too much, and he was staring at me very creepily. Keep in mind, he would have been watching from the backyard. Naturally, too, I jumped back and let out a short scream, but stupid teenage me didn't call the cops. I called my parents instead. My father, he came over to take a look. There were still footprints in the front and the backyard. I don't remember too much after that because it just felt like a very unreal experience, I guess. You never expect this stuff to happen to you. That is, until it does. So a friend and I, both 21 and female, went to Applebee's for a few $1 margaritas, then went off to a park where she said that she knew a spot. We go 20 minutes away to this park. We go down this path that takes us around 10 minutes to this bay area. We find a nice log and we sit there and we watch the sunset. As we were relaxing on the log, a family strolls by with their dog to hang out on the other side of the shore or whatever. A few minutes go by and a couple comes through and sets up. They eat a big pineapple with a knife, but the sun sets, it's still light out, but we didn't think about the walk back. And eventually we go to head back and it's dark at this point. Now, the wooden area that we have to walk through is getting really dark. So we start walking and she gets her phone camera out. It's pitch black at this point in this forest. We start talking about how creepy it actually was. And it was around this point that I felt an uneasy feeling. That feeling you get, afraid that something is behind you. Well, we're walking along and we go across the bridge up a little hill and all of a sudden we hear loud, fast footsteps on the bridge. I see light from what appeared to be from a phone, and it was moving back and forth as if somebody was sprinting. We panicked, we started running, and I'm thinking, no way this guy's chasing us. And I know that this is going to sound a bit weird, but his footsteps kind of sounded like he was on a bike maybe or something. I thought, we'll go up this steep hill on our left. There's no way that this guy's following us and no way that he would go up this hill on his bike. Turns out, there was no bike. We stopped running as we didn't hear anything. She flashes her light behind us and there's a silhouette of a man now jogging toward us. His body posture seemed to be like he got tired from running, so we kept running and stopping to see if he was still chasing us. And then again we hear footsteps running toward us. We keep looking back while running to make sure that he's not right on us. At this point, my friend screamed "hey" in a sort of panicked voice, and he screamed back "hey" as well, and then after that said, "What, are you scared?" We keep running. She's on the phone with the police. We finally hit a paved road, nowhere near her car, when I took us up the hill. That was on the wrong path we originally took. We knock on a house, lights are on but nobody answers. So we quickly start down the road to their neighbor. I look back and see a silhouette of a man walking behind that first person's house. He eventually got up to the fence and then creeped back into the darkness. That second neighbor, they helped us. His wife got us some water, and the police, they came to take us to her car. And that was the most traumatic experience I think I've ever had. The intentions of the man felt sinister, no doubt, and the way he was yelling at us felt so uncanny. I hate this feeling that I have, and I have so many questions that I know won't be answered. But I just cannot get this one question out of my head. What if he did actually catch up to us? What would have happened? So my dad had 3 consecutive heart attacks in the emergency room in the hospital. The date, June of 2021. The doctors do not expect him to come home, yet he defies them, and 3 weeks later, he is home and under the care of palliative nursing staff, along with my mum and myself.
During the next 5 months before he left us, I would walk into the room and he would be fully engrossed in a conversation with the invisibles, as we called them. Like one time he said that the room was full of Mexican people with food, but he wasn't sure that he liked Mexican food. I told him to tell them to go away, and one time he introduced me to the 2 invisibles that he said were fighter pilots. Dad said that his dad had been to see him, my uncle that my dad said traveled thousands of miles to see Dad, and despite all of this last one was definitely the clincher. So 2 days before Dad had passed, Dad was in his chair and I was sitting on his bed. "Who are all these people?" he asked me. "I don't know, Dad. They're invisible, so why don't you ask one?" My dad turns away from me and says, "Excuse me, young man. Sorry to bother you, but what is your name?" There's a brief pause, and my dad turns to me and says, "He says that his name is Andrew." "That's nice," I respond. "What does Andrew do?" he asked me. "I don't know, Dad. I can't see him." "Why don't you ask him?" He turns away from me and then says, "Excuse me, Andrew, what do you do?" There's a pause, and Dad, with his hand to his ear, leans forward and says, "I'm sorry, I didn't catch that." He then turned to me and said, He's gone." That was on a Tuesday, and 2 days later, Dad had passed. But this is where the story gets a bit freaky. So, my brother and his second wife show up on Saturday so that we can go to the funeral home and make final arrangements. I leave to put on my makeup and come back into the room 10 minutes later to Mum, my brother, and his second wife sobbing. "What did you say?" I asked my brother. All choked up, he said that he just got off the phone with his first wife, and their youngest son, Andrew, he had been hit at a crosswalk and died 7 days prior to Dad's death. Honestly, I couldn't even tell my brother until later when she had him created and buried before I told him. I personally believe that Andrew didn't want to tell his grandpa that he was dead, and that's why Dad didn't hear him. I think Andrew realized that we hadn't been told of his death and he wasn't going to tell his grandpa. That is, unless Dad didn't want to tell us. His first wife wouldn't let the kids, 5 kids they had together, see my parents, so it's no wonder Dad didn't recognize him too. So yes, I do believe in the afterlife. I just need to finish what I need to do here before I get my turn, I guess. I hope my mum and dad have a really excellent place to live when I get there too. Anyway, thanks for listening. It's a very hard story to share, and it's good to finally get it off my chest a bit. This happened a couple of weeks ago. So I was heading home from my friend's house one night, around 11:30 p.m. My friend lives about 25 minutes from me, and the fastest way to get home is if I take back roads from there. I live in a small rural town. Anyways, I'm driving home with another car about maybe 4 car lengths in front of me. I'm about 5 minutes from my house when I see the car's taillights suddenly break, then the car speeds off and turns off of a road to where I couldn't see it anymore. I didn't think too much of it. I mean, maybe a raccoon ran out in front of them and they didn't want to hit it. As I get to the part of the road where that car slammed on their brakes, a man, a huge man, probably 6+ feet tall in a black hoodie, jumps in front of my car, flailing his arms and yelling at me. I swerve to the right to not hit him, and I look in my rear view and he's gone. This road does have houses, but where this man was, there were none. No streetlights, no broken down car, nothing. I raced home and called my husband, who was about 2.5 hours away at an event and wouldn't be home until after midnight. I told him what happened and how he just disappeared, and I was terrified to get out of my car to walk out into a house. He stayed on the phone with me until I got inside and immediately headed home too. There's been a lot of weird break-ins around my area lately too, and people trying to steal cars as well. I can't even imagine what would have happened if I stopped my car. Not that I ever would. I mean, I've seen too many true crime documentaries to do that. I avoid taking that way home now, and if I do, honestly, that's pretty much all I think about. The last house that I lived in with my parents was haunted, and I mean severely haunted. When we first moved in and I was left to sit with the stuff while my parents made trips, even though it was empty, I had never been more afraid. I knew that there were things there. I could feel it, and I was terrified. Not long after we moved in, it all started kicking off too. Stuff would move on its own, and I don't mean just things that weren't stable. I had seen it, and my mum had seen it, but my dad still said that he didn't believe in it. Until one night, when we were all watching TV, we looked into the hall all at the same time, and the car keys lifted off the cabinet and fell on the floor like someone had picked them up and dropped them. My dad hadn't seen this happen before, and his response was nervously, "Right, that's it, we're going to bed." Then, there was the thing in the bathroom mirror. So I was cleaning my teeth before bed, and I looked into the mirror, and there was this thing that looked like a little kid with long hair, but its eyes were pure black. Scared the life out of me. But what was even weirder was that when I looked into my wardrobe and there was a crumpled red dress with blue butterflies on it, exactly like what that thing was wearing. It wasn't mine, mind you, and it looked like it would be the right size for maybe a 5-year-old. Once I saw an apparition in the doorway to my parents' bedroom that looked like a woman with long hair holding a knife. I screamed and tried to run, but ended up tripping and falling down the stairs. I told my dad I got spooked by a spider, but then my mum asked when he wasn't around, and when I told her, she wasn't surprised because she sometimes felt that there was someone in the bedroom with her when she was by herself. My dollhouse, it used to open by itself when it was latched. The latch worked fine and was sometimes so stiff that I had to pull on it to get it off, but it would just open when I wasn't even there, near it. My mum didn't believe me until she saw it, and she was startled by it. Something used to play with the bathroom tap too, and it wasn't the tap being dodgy or whatever. It was old and stiff, and a lot of the time took 2 people to just turn it on. The most memorable time, though, was when I was about to head out the door to high school when nobody else was up and the tap turned on. I shouted up the stairs, "Please, now's not the time. I'll get in trouble for leaving the tap on." And amazingly, it actually turned off. Another time when I was in the bathroom getting ready for bed, I was about to leave and suddenly I got this, I don't know, like a strange overwhelming urge to sit down, and as soon as I did, I put my hand out and felt drips of water falling on my hand. I told my mum about it, and she said that it was something related to spirits, but I can't remember exactly what. A lot of the time, both me and my mum would avoid going upstairs, though, because we'd stand at the bottom of the stairs and we'd just get this awful, uneasy feeling that something didn't want us up there. And so, we would just wait. I'll end this by saying that I don't experience hallucinations, I don't have any form of psychosis or schizophrenia, and nothing like this has happened since moving out of that place. And quite honestly, I'm just happy that that place is somebody else's problem now.
I wanted to share this story as something that happened recently, that links back to something that happened in my childhood, that really I couldn't explain at the time. So I, 25 and male, grew up in a small village in rural England with both my parents and 2 siblings, 1 brother and 1 sister. I always loved the paranormal for the entertainment side, but I never truly believed it myself. I watched debunking shows all the time like Fact or Faked, and readily enjoyed arguments against experiences that people had. Our house sat not far from local farmland. A few roads led to the entrance to the local woods, which separated the village from the fields next door. Everyone in my family, too, had a story about an experience that they'd had. My mother and sister both claimed to have seen a ghostly figure of a farmer peer around the door at them, but disappear quickly when they turned to look at him. My mum also claims of dreaming about twin girls standing over her bed at night. My dad never suffered from night terrors prior to moving to this house, but began in earnest around a year after we first moved in. My brother had less dramatic encounters, but claims the feeling of something in his bed at 1 a.m, pressing down on his side with force. All of this I never believed, and I'm not sure I even do now. I mean, we're all avid horror lovers, and all of these felt to me like cheap versions of what you'd see in like a B-rated ghost movie. Well, 14 years I've lived in this house, and I've never experienced anything remotely odd or out of place. When I was 16, the first real strange thing happened though. But when I was 16, the first real strange thing, I guess you could say, happened. Our home has 3 floors in a very narrow terraced house. The first floor had my siblings' bedrooms, and the top floor had mine and my parents'. As the stairs curved at the top, you immediately face my parents' room, and turning 90 degrees right would face my own. After a movie, I was heading up to play some video games for the evening. The lights were off on the top floor, but with a quick turn to my room, I didn't bother flicking them on, as I would usually just turn on my own after entering my room anyway. As I approached the halfway point on the flight of stairs, there was an incredibly bright flash of blue light that highlighted the entire floor. Ordinarily in the dark, you could only make out a few features of a room with the door open, but this light took the whole floor from night to day practically. The blue was striking, and I distinctly recall being able to see right through to the back wall of my parents' bedroom. The flash only lasted a few seconds, but I could clearly make out that it had originated from, well, my bedroom. I did the bravest thing that I could think of, and immediately turned 180 degrees and legged it back downstairs. I remained down there for an hour or so and explained it as best as I could. I landed on the explanation that it must have been a police car or something, sirens on silent, but that would explain the blue and why it didn't last so long. When my parents finally went to bed, I followed and was immediately greeted by my closed bedroom door, which instantly had me questioning, well, where the heck had that light come from? I was creeped out but moved forward. Nothing else weird happened, so I chalked it up to just either the police car still flashing under the door frame or my wandering imagination, I guess. And it didn't bother me again until a month later. My girlfriend had come to stay the night one night. My parents were fairly relaxed, so even at 16 they were happy to let us at each other's homes on the weekends. We had gone to sleep relatively early for our age, around 10 p.m. if I had to guess. I remember my eyes popping open at a strange sight though. My room was exactly as it was when I had gone to sleep. My girlfriend sound asleep next to me. Everything matched completely down to the crack in the curtain, but through the crack in the curtain, I could make out 2 distinct black eyes staring back at me. They didn't move, nor blink, but I could tell that they were focused on me. I couldn't move, but I began to hyperventilate. As my breathing grew heavier, I could feel panic setting in. I didn't feel panicked at not being able to move, but it was what was looking at me that panicked me. It didn't speak, move, or make any indication of what it was there for, but I felt petrified, almost as if I knew that what was out there wanted to hurt me. My girlfriend woke me up in hysterics, saying that I had started mumbling incoherently in my sleep before beginning to panic and thrash. I didn't even realize that I had done any of that, as I only woke to her shaking me, but I remembered that dream so vividly. I remember it now too, almost 9 years later, and what helps me remember it so vividly was the fact that it happened again. 9 years I lived my life in there and moved with my beautiful girlfriend into our own home eventually. Everything had been normal. I finished uni, got a job, got a house, planning for the future and all that. It was a work night, so myself and my partner went to bed at a normal time for us. We tucked in at around 9:30, both read our respective books, and it must have been at around 10 when we both kissed each other goodnight and we went to sleep. I woke in that night, unable to move, the room the same as it was, and again, two black eyes through the crack in the curtain staring right at me. The hyperventilating began, and again I panicked at what this thing wanted. As I panicked, I noticed a blue light, though, begin to fill the room to my right. I couldn't turn to see, but I knew the doorway sat right by my head was where the light was coming from. I shot awake suddenly, covered in sweat, at about 5 in the morning. I don't know if I had mumbled or thrashed in my sleep, as my partner was still zonked out that night. I looked around the room, nothing out of place or different, but I just couldn't shake that panic that I felt looking at that thing. It had been the exact panic that I had felt 9 years earlier in my childhood room. This was 4 days ago now, and it hasn't stopped playing in my mind since. I usually work from home, but I've been heading into the office every day this week. I told my partner that it's because we have important project deadlines as a team, but really I just don't want to be in that house anymore. I've ordered clothes pegs from Amazon to ensure the curtains are fully closed at night from now on, staying awake last to do it without having to explain why I'm doing it. As a kid, I put it down to just an overactive imagination, but I know what I saw in that window was the same thing as nearly a decade ago, and I really do not want it to come back again. This is the story of an experience I had in Cradle Mountain National Park in Tasmania, Australia, in my early teens. Despite causing no physical injury, it has haunted me into adulthood. So I grew up in a family of avid hikers. Both my mother, a botanist, and my father, a biologist for the University of Tasmania, would regularly visit the deepest wilderness areas of Tasmania during their field studies. These trips, they were disguised as camping and hiking adventures for the family. I never minded though, as I was just as passionate about the outdoors as they were, even from a young age. The key word being was, as after what I went through, even 20 plus years later, I still refused to return. So we lived on a property a short driving distance from Lake St. Clair, a popular tourist destination. This was the only place my parents would allow me to camp and experience the wilderness alone, as long as I brought my German Shepherd with me. He was a former police dog and very well trained. At 12 or 13 years old, honestly, I didn't really mind either. It felt like my own little slice of freedom in my own little slice of the wilderness, despite being surrounded by people. It was easy to ignore them, I guess, but as I got older and more brazen, I found myself hounding my parents to let me take my quad bike deeper into the park to camp, to test my own abilities and prove to them that I was capable of doing so, and that I wasn't just a little kid anymore. It was that overconfidence that led me to that situation and caused this trauma, I guess you could say. I was 15 at the time of the experience, at the age where I thought that I was invincible, knew everything that there was to know, and was untouchable. So after asking my parents for what felt like an uncountable number of times and being told no just as many times, I had enough and I decided to just go. I told my parents that I and a few of my friends were going to the lake to camp and do some fishing over the weekend. Instead, I took my tent, my quad, and headed into the reserve. I left just after sunrise to maximize daylight and to make it as far in as I felt comfortable. Once arriving, I set up camp and had some food and decided to go for a bit of an exploration. I knew of a spot nearby, actually, with a gorgeous rock face where fossils had been found in the past, so I thought that I would try my luck. Shortly into the walk, I realized that I'd been turned around at some point and had no idea where I was anymore. At the time, I didn't see it as that big of a deal, as I had a compass and knew that if I headed south it would take me back to the lake, and that I could walk from there. However, by this time it was getting late in the afternoon, so stupidly I decided to try my chances and make it back to my camp and quad bike so I wasn't walking back to camp from the lake in the dark, which in the end was a big mistake. It was about 4:30 p.m. and the sun had begun to dip below the tree line, casting dark shadows across my walking path. That's when the forest, all of a sudden, went completely silent. And when I say silent, I mean absolutely silent. No wind, no birds, no forest sounds at all, which made my heart rate skyrocket. It was getting dark, and the silence was all of a sudden suffocating. I just wanted to get back to my camp, light a fire, eat some snacks, and spend my night watching nature's television until I fell asleep. But right then, that's when from every direction, I would hear the sound of twigs cracking and something moving in the canopy above me. It was no big deal at first, probably birds or some other sort of small animals, I thought. But then, as clear as day, "Hey, come here." At first I felt relieved, as I thought somebody along the trails had seen me, noticed I was a bit disheveled, and wanted to help. But looking back, I saw no one. Then it happened again, but behind me this time. The same voice, but I noticed it was coming from up in the trees. I responded, "I can't see you. Where are you?" and asked for some help because I thought that I just couldn't see the person calling out. But then it happened again, this time from my left. And it was then when I decided to run. I took off into the brush and ran for a good 2 minutes before I stopped to catch my breath and look at my compass to start making my way towards the lake. I was terrified but felt that I had covered enough distance that I wasn't in any immediate danger now. But seconds after checking my compass and starting to walk, I heard it again. "Hey, come here." But this time, it was right behind me. I spun around and I saw absolutely nothing. So I began sprinting again and didn't stop this time. The last thing that I heard before bursting out of the trees onto the lakefront was the most evil, demonic laugh that I had ever heard. It sounded like 3 people laughing at once. I immediately called my parents to come and get me, told them what I did and what happened, but they were more focused on my disobedience than my experience, which honestly I was shocked by. The moment that they picked me up was the first time that I felt relief, and I genuinely just cried the whole drive home. I didn't sleep properly for days after that. My dad went and picked up my quad and tidied up my camp and all that. And since that day, I have never stepped foot away from that lake when being out there. If anyone has had any experience like this, I would genuinely love to hear it because it took my passion from me. I truly miss being out there, away from society, but after this, I just cannot bring myself to do it again. I've lived in my home for the past 14 years. For the past 12, it's been relatively quiet and normal. Our first 2 years in the home were a different story, though. I'm not sure why we experienced some odd things in the beginning. Perhaps someone out there might have some insight as to why things just stopped, or perhaps I just am not meant to know. Whatever the case, here's what happened. So our house isn't anything that you'd think of when you think haunted. There's been no murder here. The house was built in the mid-80s, and as far as we know, it's not situated on a Native American burial ground of any sort. Just your typical American single-family home on a typical neighborhood road. In any case, we moved in and we got settled pretty quickly. After a couple of months, we started noticing issues with our front door. It kept opening on its own for some reason. We'd be sitting in the kitchen eating dinner and the door would just sort of swing open. Weird, but explainable. My husband figured that it was likely a loose doorknob or something. We did have a bit of a bad habit of not locking our doors as well. We live in a pretty quiet, rural-ish neighborhood, and we also own two 200-plus pound mastiffs, and if you can get past them, well, you're pretty much welcome to whatever you want to steal. So perhaps the wind was to blame is what I'm getting at. Tightening screws never fixed the issue. So off to Lowe's, my husband went to procure an entire new door handle and lock. We installed that and we waited. A couple of weeks later, we were all watching a movie in the living room and that door swings open on its own accord again. We decided that it's likely from the house settling and the door frame might be slightly skewed or whatever, so in the end we just go on with life. But then the animals started seeing things that we couldn't. Like the cats would stare in unison at a spot in the room, then track something moving across the room. The dogs would suddenly go on alert and bark with their heckles raised. That started happening more frequently as well, and quite honestly that spooked me a bit. I mean, I trust my animals and they didn't act the fool over pretty much nothing. They were absolutely sensing and or seeing something that I wasn't. And then the big finale. So about a year and a half after we moved in and had these minor little instances that could be explained away or shrugged off, something happened that we really couldn't explain. Something that truly shook us to our core. It was around the holidays, right after Christmas. The kids were in bed. It was late, past midnight. My husband and I were cleaning up the living room a little bit when the front door blew open again. That hadn't happened in a while, but it didn't really even register, I guess. I shut the door and decided to secure the deadbolt, concluding that it was perhaps a bit more windy than usual out. My husband and I decided to head to bed and pop a movie on Netflix, and we settled in with the lights out and began our movie as we settled into sleep. I'm feeling totally relaxed and about to drift off when we hear a loud crash from the hallway. It startled both of us to full alertness, and I tell my husband to see what the heck that was. My husband goes out into the hallway and into the bathroom that is right across the hall from our room. He comes back to our room to report to me that the decorative snowman that had been residing on the back of the toilet since right after Thanksgiving was now on the floor, smashed to bits. He said that it was weird though, because if it had just slid off somehow, it wouldn't have been smashed violently enough to cause it to break into so many pieces. Plus, the crash that we had heard wouldn't have been so loud. It was as if the figurine had been violently thrown to the floor on purpose. Well, I investigate. Was the washer on, possibly vibrating the floor? No. Were one of the kids up and perhaps they did it? No, both still sound asleep. Any animals that could have gotten into the bathroom and done it? No, the cats were in our rooms with us and one dog in her crate and the other was snoring in my son's bed with him. Which means that really I just couldn't find a logical reason for this. Odd. Well, in any case, my husband grabs the broom and the dustpan and goes into the bathroom to clean up all the glass. Within a minute, he's tearing back into our room though with a look of panic on his face, trying in vain to pat his own back. He was yelling that his back was on fire and I needed to look at it to help him. He pulls off his shirt and turns around, and across his back are 3 parallel gouges. I wouldn't even call them scratches because they were really deep. They were instantly oozing blood and the skin around the wounds were angry and red. My husband was in obvious discomfort and was asking what I saw, stating over and over that his back felt like it had been burned or something. My back is on fire is what he kept exclaiming. I grabbed some Neosporin and first aid supplies from the bathroom and cleaned up his back. And it took almost an hour before the burning sensation subsided enough for him to settle back into bed comfortably. After I had tended to his back, I grabbed my husband's discarded t-shirt from the floor to inspect it. Quite honestly, with the way that he was gouged out like that, and with that much blood, I was thinking that I would find holes in the t-shirt for sure. But that shirt, it was totally fine. No scratch areas in the shirt, a little bit of blood spotting on the inside, but no scratched or torn fabric that would explain something damaging his back like that. How did he get deep scratches all the way across his back while wearing a t-shirt, and the shirt was totally unscathed like that? I mean, how does that even work? It couldn't have been something that he caught himself on and injured himself with, like if maybe he was standing from a crouched position and scraped his back on the counter corner or something. Besides, that would only leave one scratch, not 3 parallel ones. Well, I was truly spooked by that, and started to believe that there may be something dark in our home. I'm not much on organized religion, but I do believe in a higher power, and I was spooked enough that night to both pray aloud for protection for my family, as well as loudly rebuke anything that would have been with us in that house. I didn't expect much from these actions, but was scared enough to go through the motions of telling this invisible scratcher to get the heck out of our home. We eventually got back into bed, and eventually we also fell asleep. After that night, there was another instance or two of the front door opening on its own, but other than that, it was all clear and quiet on the home front. And then, nothing weird. And that was like 11 or maybe 12 years ago now. I really don't know what to think about the entire experience. The front door issues, they could have just been a faulty door or really windy nights. The scratches, however, I truly cannot explain that with any logic, regardless of how hard I've tried. So, what the heck was that? A demon? A ghost? An accident? Why did we have just one giant traumatic event and then radio silence? Has anyone ever experienced anything similar to this? I sure don't have any explanations or answers. Really, I just have more questions. So my friends and I went to a local haunted spot called Ghost Road. We had some spooky things happen, I guess you could say. Orbs moving around, shadow figures, sounds of footsteps, etc. We were all spooked out, but also knew for the most part everything that we saw could mostly be ruled out as cars, animals, and general paranoia. Afterwards, too, we went randonauting. Hopefully you know what that is. The location took us up to a spot just past a cemetery, but it wound up being private property in BFE. And we live in a rural area, so, people have guns and all that. So we decided to stop and just pause for a minute. Now, I'm a very spiritual person, I fully admit that. So I started trying to feel some stuff out, and then I did. So I started guiding us by vibes alone. We eventually wound up in even more BFE surrounded by open fields. We got out of the car and started blindly walking around. A random note too, that we all started feeling sick upon going down this road, but again we wrote it off as just paranoia and nerves. Suddenly though, 3 of us out of the 5 all turned and said left. So we went left, wound up at a fence, and coincidentally a broken part of the fence that allowed entrance. The same 3 of us though all of a sudden thought that we had all seen something, and 2 of us decided to go towards it. The girl that went over to the fence with me doesn't really believe in supernatural stuff, so she wasn't really scared at all. Her confidence rubbed off on me, I think, so I started feeling a bit better too. We decided to run towards the pole in the middle of the field where the 3 of us were seeing stuff. And this is where things got really scary. So we touched the pole in the field, and as we started running back, we heard what I cannot describe as anything other than a wheezing scream. We started sprinting for real at that, and the run back for some reason took twice as long as the jog there. The other three in the group had already restarted the car and were yelling for us to hurry, because apparently all 5 of us had heard the same scream. The car struggled to start but finally did, and we hauled butt out of there quickly. And again, all 5 of us heard the same scream from the exact same direction. We were all terrified, and we all just felt this sheer dread for the entire drive back home. So, has anyone else ever experienced anything like this? Or does anyone have any idea of what it might have been that we encountered that night? This happened approximately 10 years ago, around 2015 to 2016. So I was living with someone at the time who worked an opposite schedule as me. He worked graveyard and I worked during the day. So when I was getting up to get ready to leave for work, he was just coming home usually. On the nights during the week, I obviously would be at home by myself. And one night during the week, I was feeling especially lonely and my favorite toy unfortunately broke and died. So I decided to drive downtown to the 24-hour adult store to buy another one. The town that I live in is a mid-sized suburban town, filled with mostly residential areas. The main downtown area was essentially one small area on the way to the freeway. My apartment was 10 minutes away. So, I pulled into the parking lot behind the adult store. The parking lot was dark and had multiple entries all around that led to the bars and the restaurants as well as the store. After parking my car, I walked towards the entrance of the store, which was on the street. To do so, I had to walk towards the driveway I came in to park on. Upon walking to the entrance, I noticed a man standing by himself smoking a cigarette. It was 1 a.m. and not normal just to see only one person standing by themselves. I figured that he was one of the patrons from one of the bars on the block taking a cigarette break or something. As I walked past him, he said hi, to which I responded with a quiet hi back, but didn't make eye contact with the man. Upon passing him, I had a better look at his appearance. He had a shaved head, wore a long white t-shirt with shorts hanging past his knees. He had on a pair of sneakers accompanied with some tube socks that covered his shins. This is not unusual to see in my town, but I was more concerned that he was sitting by himself and instantly took an interest in me as I walked past him. Now, after passing him and continuing to walk to the store, I saw, out of the corner of my eye, the man proceeded to follow behind me. And when I say follow, I don't mean he coincidentally was just walking behind me. He immediately followed right behind me as soon as I passed him, making a point to maintain the same walking speed. Obviously, I did not know this man's intentions, but a man by himself late at night is a recipe for trouble in my books. As I looked down the dark and empty street, I weighed out my options of where to go. Initially, I thought, well, I'll just keep walking, so he doesn't know that I'm going to the adult store. But since it was 1 a.m. and there was no one on the street, I thought that could be more dangerous. Then I thought, just go into one of the bars. But then I thought that would give him an easier introduction to approach me. So then I realized my best bet was to continue into the store where I know was well lit and people who could see me. I proceeded to shop for what I came for there. The man entered the store behind me, but hung out of the front store so as to not look like he was following me around, I suppose. He wasn't even pretending to shop. He literally just sat at the front waiting. As I was shopping, I heard the man make a sort of tss sound, to which I ignored it. Clearly, he wasn't getting the message, and he continued making the sound as I continued to shop without noticing. Eventually, I walked up to the cashier, who was completely oblivious to what was going on, by the way. I tried to whisper to the cashier, "Do you know that man, or does he work here or something?" The cashier asked me to repeat what I was saying. I asked again, but still spoke in a quiet voice. Not understanding my attempt to be discreet, the cashier responded, "I can't hear you. Say that again?" At this point, I felt like my cover was blown. So in a more normal tone, I told the cashier the man in the front followed me from outside and won't leave me alone. I explained my car was parked in the lot behind the store and that I didn't feel comfortable going to my car anymore. The cashier said, "Okay." The cash wrap area was an enclosed square-shaped counter to maintain distance between the staff and the customers. The cashier walked to the front by where the man was and from behind the counter told the man to leave. He then came up and assured me that he had told the man to go away. Though the man did not, in fact, go away. He continued to stay there. Given that I didn't want him to follow me to my car, obviously, I stayed in the store and pretended like I was still shopping, even though I'd already found what I'd come in for. I would occasionally glance to the front to see if the man was still there, and he was. I kept going up to the cashier, explaining that the man hasn't left, so he went up to the front to talk to him again. I heard the cashier say, "Enough already, leave the store," and while he was doing this, I went to the far back end of the store to remain out of sight. By the time that I'd circled back to the cashier, I noticed that the man was no longer in the store. The cashier said that he repeatedly and more assertively told the man to leave. He said that the man claimed that he didn't understand English. The cashier then said that he pulled a baton that he kept under the counter for protection, held it over his head and asked the man, "Do you understand this?" To which the man finally left the store. Well, I made my purchase but was still worried about walking to my car, even though I was parked in one of the first spaces when you come through the driveway. The cashier pointed at a small TV behind him that had 4 angles of CCTV footage. He assured me that the man was gone, and if I saw him to come back to the store. He also said that he will see me when I walk to the car, and even though I would have felt more comfortable with him walking me to the car, I understood that he was by himself and really couldn't leave the store unattended with customers. So, after making my purchase, I sped walked to my car. I always have my keys at the ready when walking to my car, so I promptly pressed the unlock on my car remote, got into the car, placed my bag of purchases on the passenger seat, and proceeded to start the car. Once my car turned on, I took off the e-brake, put the car into reverse, and while putting on my seatbelt, I looked in my side view mirror to back out. And it was at that point that I saw that man in the side view mirror, full-on speed walking right to my driver's side door. I was driving an Accord at the time, and that model automatically locks all the doors when you take the car out of park, and as soon as I saw him, I hit the gas and violently pulled out of the parking space. I pulled out so fast that it startled him and stopped him dead in his tracks. He was standing right next to my driver's side door as I continued to pull out, and even had a go at trying to open the door. I gave him the most serious dead stare that I could, because I know that most predators play off the fear of their victims. The stare must have worked. As soon as he saw me pull out while staring at him, he turned his head back to the driveway entrance and proceeded to walk back to where he was standing. He had a look of defeat on his face. My face, however, was overcome with relief. I pulled out of the parking lot and I took myself back home. I felt a bit of shame being by myself going out so late like that and experiencing this. I did tell my boyfriend about the incident when he came home at about 6 a.m. He also concurred with me that going out that late by myself really wasn't the smartest thing to do. I'm no longer with that person, but I still live in the same town, though I never leave my home for anything past 9 o'clock anymore. While the town that I live in isn't the most dangerous, there is still enough crime here that occurs that it's also not considered the safest. And so the moral of the story is to be careful when going out late at night. As a child, I had a lot of bad experiences at my childhood home. A lot of abuse, incidences, and overall just bad vibes. Very rarely did people feel at ease, and I was always terrified of the basement of that house. I don't know why, but growing up it was the scariest thing ever, and I had also refused to sleep alone until I was probably about 9 years old. I was always terrified of the mirror hanging over my bed. Now, I remember being downstairs and walking past a cabinet that held my grandmother's fine china. It all flew open at me and shattered on the ground. None of it had hit me somehow, but I'm still shocked to this day how that had happened, as the cabinets had been jammed and incredibly hard to open. Something similar to this was a very large heavy portrait of a bullfighter falling right behind me. You can argue that it just gave out after years of being hung up, but honestly, the nail was fine, so it was a bit weird. In any case, after my grandmother had died, things got weirder. That's when I finally agreed to sleep alone, and when I'd sleep in my bed, I could feel large hands stroking my back. I reported this to my mum one year, and she said that she had felt that before too. Sometimes it made me incredibly uncomfortable, and other times it would feel, well, sort of calming, I guess, as if somebody else was trying to soothe me to sleep. I also began to hear voices call me from downstairs, specifically my mother's, which I had never lived with my mother until I was about 12 or 13, since my parents were divorced. So, being the freaked out kid I was, I'd yell back down the stairs or taunt it back. This probably wasn't the best idea, I'll admit. Then my father died, and so it was just me and my grandfather alone in the house. I cannot remember if I'd hear the voices calling out to me or not, but I began to have these terrible nightmares. I had nightmares from the perspective of something that was watching me sleep. Its vision was green, almost like night vision, and it was standing in my doorway, just watching me. It had left and turned the corner down the hallway that led to my deceased father's room. In my dream, I woke up from the nightmare and screamed at it from my room. This prompted it to turn back around and start returning to my room, and that's when I woke up from that nightmare. Eventually, my grandfather got too sickly to care for me anymore, so I moved out to live with my mother. And to this day, that house has been the only place that I have ever experienced anything like that. I once visited it with my uncle before they renovated and cleaned it up. I toured the house again and realized that it was even more disgusting than I realized. The floors were rotting, the sinks were full of dirt, and just overall the house looked terrible. When we went out through the basement and turned around to go back in, I realized that we'd actually been locked out. That was weird because really that shouldn't have been possible. We had to go through the gate that surrounded the backyard to get back in, and I realized that the house, or whatever was in it, clearly didn't want me there anymore. And honestly, I'm fine with that. Years later, I have never visited that place again, and can only wish the family currently residing there the best of luck with it all. Oh, and I don't know if this is also related, but I also just remembered constantly being shifted in my sleep, like waking upside down all the time. I can't recall this happening since I had moved out, but that could have just been me moving. I'm not really sure, but it sure felt like somebody else was moving me. So I'm 23 now, and this happened 2 years ago. It was maybe 11 p.m. I cannot remember the exact day, but this always brings chills down my spine every time that I think about it. I've also only told 2 people in my life about it. Now, I'm not into the paranormal stuff at all. I know that it's odd that I'm sharing this here, but I'm just looking for any insight into what I experienced, I guess. Now, the basic layout of my basement, it helps explain what happened, so I'll give you the layout. There's a post to the right of my couch and a wall to the left. The only way to head to the washroom is to walk around the post towards the back of the couch and down the left side behind that wall. This is relative to the couch facing forward. And one night, I had to use the washroom, and as I was walking towards said washroom, I had this really strange feeling to just turn around, which, well, never happens. As I turned my head, all I could see was this human figure made of just light, standing on the other side of the couch. Now, this light wasn't bright or anything. My lights were on and it kind of just moved the room's light, so I had a good look at it. I couldn't see through it or anything. It was just there, standing and staring at me for at least 2 to 3 seconds. I felt nothing. My heart didn't race. I was just sort of fascinated, but it seemed like it was caught off guard at the fact that I was staring directly at it, so it ran, sprinted towards the opposite side of the room, and as soon as it passed behind the post, it completely disappeared. This was the only time that I'd ever seen anything like that in my life, and I've never had any paranormal encounters in my life besides this one. It was odd too, because it was like another person was in my house just curiously looking at me. It didn't have a face, but the best way that I can describe it is that it was a human form made of pure white light, but besides that it seemed more scared of me than I was of it. It wasn't until it disappeared when I felt this urge of what the heck just happened. I started to understand the weight of what I had just seen. Mind you, I was dead sober. I don't drink or smoke or anything. My house is only 6 years old at this stage, and no one lived in it before me. I don't have any dead relatives either, and honestly, I just have no idea what that was. So, is there anyone here who might know what that could have been, or maybe experienced something exactly like it? It was both a terrifying and, well, crazy experience. I've always been a skeptic about ghosts, but my family has a chilling story that, well, centers around me. Despite the events, I remain doubtful because I was only 6 years old at the time and I remember very little. What follows, though, is the story of House 404, as told by my family, and faint fragments of my own memory. So it all started when my family moved into a new home, after my mum and stepdad got together. During the showing, the realtor mentioned that the roses taped to the walls shouldn't be removed. Even as a kid, I found that a bit odd. Naturally, my stepdad took them down right after we moved in. I mean, who would want roses taped on their walls like that? But strange things began happening soon afterward. Like one day, I came home alone after school, sat on the couch and put on my Snow Buddies, my favorite movie. Though I hadn't noticed anything unusual before, I suddenly felt uneasy, as if I wasn't alone. Then I heard a pacing upstairs in my brother's room, the only room on the top floor. However, the moment that my brother got home, the noises stopped. This certainly wasn't an isolated incident either. My aunt, who stayed in the basement with my uncle, often heard footsteps upstairs when nobody was home. She too was a skeptic like me, but would often frantically call my mum to tell her about the walking that she could hear when everybody was away. She and my uncle moved out quickly in the end too. Our dog, Bear, a large Australian Shepherd mix, started acting strange too. He refused to go upstairs, barked at the bottom of the stairs, and often growled while staring at my brother's bedroom door, where the pacing was heard, and would always sleep outside of my room at night. Now one day, my brother's friend and his brother came over to play hide and seek in the basement. I hid behind the washer while the other two chose spots under the futon and behind the TV speaker. My brother found his best friend pale and trembling under the futon though. When we asked him what had happened after the game was done, He claimed that he had seen footprints on the carpet and heard a woman whispering in his ear. When they found me, the boys spotted writing in what looked like red chalk or paint on the concrete wall right near my hiding spot, and it read something like, "These roses shall not be removed. They keep her spirit at bay. I say goodbye, for I'll kill myself today." After that, my brother's friends swore that he'd never come back to this house, and at this point, 4 people now never wanted to come back. My aunt and uncle, and now my brother's friend and his brother. Well, a few nights later, as I slept, my stepdad's cousin, sitting in the living room, which had a straight view into my room, noticed something moving in my room. It had a glass door because it was supposed to be an office, but he alerted my parents, and they all watched as my blanket was lifted off of my bed, not once but 3 times, before it was yanked to the floor. Moments later, I was thrown from my bed across the room. I remember waking up crying, lying near my dresser, and my stepdad rushing in to comfort me, putting me back to bed eventually. He claimed that he didn't sleep for nights after witnessing that too. He said that he would sit on the couch just watching my room, just as the dog would do from outside of my door. And we moved out only about a week after that. Years later, I researched the house's history, curious to see if any listings said anything about the encounters that we had, and learned of a murder-suicide. A man had apparently killed his wife days after their wedding before hanging himself in my brother's room. Her body was found in a sealed crawl space in the closet of my brother's room, where we would sometimes hear scratching. The roses taped to the walls, well, they were from her wedding and seemed to hold her spirit at bay from what the man wrote on the wall. Removing them allegedly unleashed her. We say that she targeted me because she had been pregnant at the time of her death and couldn't have the child that she longed for, so she got mad that I was a child living in the house that her child should have been living in. And as someone who is a skeptic myself, I genuinely see how this story may sound fabricated. I personally believe that I kicked my blanket off and rolled out of bed. The footsteps that I heard, they could have been shifting foundations in the house for sure. The dog growling may have just been the dog knowing about an animal that was in the crawl space. That explains the scratching too. The note, well, that could have been written by a delusional man that murdered his wife and believed that she was haunting him some time ago. And the footprints and the whisper, that could have been my brother's friend messing around with us for sure. Still though, my parents swear that the bed, it wasn't just me falling out of it. I thought that I'd share this story that my stepdad to this day hates bringing up. It's one of the few things that has actually scared him, and I think it's because, well, the entity targeted me. For some context, I work in a small private airport as an admin. The building itself, well, imagine it's a big rectangle. At the front there are 2 offices, mine and my supervisor's. In the middle there is the check-in and the security, a waiting area and washrooms, and at the back at the end of the long hallway, there's a kitchen and the control room. There are usually about, I would say 2 to 4 people here at all times, not including when passengers come in and out, which is generally at scheduled times of the day. Now, yesterday I was washing some dishes in the kitchen with no headphones on, no music, just the sound of the water running. The sink looks into the wall, so naturally I was standing with my back to the door when all of a sudden I heard a man's voice go, "Hey, how are you?" I immediately turned around, thinking that one of the control room guys had come in and said hello, but when I did, there was no one there. Then the realization dawned on me that that wasn't a voice that I recognized, and it had happened right next to my ear as well. No footsteps were going in and out of the kitchen. The door into the hallway was way too far away for anyone to run out so quickly without me seeing or hearing them at least. And also, the control room guys were gone for the day since there were no more flights. I stood there paralyzed, looking toward the only entrance in the room for a whole minute. My arm hair stood on point, and I just had a feeling that somebody else was in that room with me. The voice itself sounded a little bit muffled almost. Far away, I guess you could say, but not at the same time. Like being talked through a very thin wall, maybe, if that makes any sense. It was right next to my left ear, though, where somebody could have been standing, but I can assure you that no one was. The tone in which he said it was very friendly and paused, like you just ran into someone you know at the grocery store type of thing. I tried to shake the feeling off to just finish up, and I left the kitchen as quickly as I could. I also confirmed along the way that nobody else except me and the supervisor were in that building, and he was in the office at the front of the building. Once he saw how freaked out I looked, though, he promised me that it definitely wasn't him. For a moment, I tried to convince myself that it was just the comms, the radio in the control room, but upon further thought, it sounded nothing like that. I mean, I'm used to that radio going off, and I know exactly what it sounds like. Also, why would anyone just say that sentence into it? It was all very odd, and I am definitely still a bit freaked out. We have had many other instances and experiences in this place, such as seeing things or what looks like someone walking into an empty room from the corner of my eye, keyboards clacking when nobody else should be in the office, security sensors going off on their own, and many others. But I might have to share those another time. For now, I'm just wondering if anybody else has had a similar experience to this. I would love to hear about your stories or maybe even your theories as to what this was. And so, thanks for listening. Last year I moved out on my own with my boyfriend into our own apartment. We lived in Old Town, which is already considered pretty sketchy. We had seen this apartment online for $650 a month, and that was a deal in this area. That apartment, however, was taken, but the landlord owned another apartment fourplex that had an apartment for the same price. However, the previous tenant had allegedly died. I said that was fine because, people die all the time. So we went and checked it out. It didn't feel very off at first, I guess. It came with a washer and a dryer and wasn't far from my college campus, so I figured that it would stick. Anyways, moving on to the man who died that my landlord was legally obligated to tell me about. His name is Clifford. He had died recently, so recent that weeks before he was walking about and living his normal life, and then suddenly he was just gone. He had heart problems and he did die in the hospital, though the landlord said that he had actually died in the apartment, but apparently the man who lived there 10-ish so years ago prior to Cliff, he was the one who had actually died in the apartment. But I wasn't given a name or any details, and my landlord was too young to have known the guy since the place used to belong to his dad prior. Anyway, the only thing that bothered me when we first moved in was the carpet was well past needing replacing and had a stain that honestly was vaguely dead body shaped. We ended up putting a rug over it because no amount of carpet cleaning would get it out. Trust me, I really tried, and it just never came clean. The apartment was old and I was fine with that, but I'd wake up often to, odd feelings of being watched, I guess. I'd feel him in corners, and when I was in the shower, I could feel eyes on me. My partner never said anything, but he liked to ignore ghosts and things like that because he doesn't think that they're real. The neighbor who was in apartment 1 was also not very nice. And one day after my boyfriend and I had been gone, they told us that we were too loud and banging on the walls the night before, apparently. I told her that we weren't even there the last night, and we certainly don't bang on the walls. I also couldn't hear either neighbor on each side, and one of them was of a family of 4, so I don't know what she heard, but it definitely wasn't us. I only ever really interacted with the family of 4, and I never learned their names, and they never really learned mine, but we knew each other's pets' names, and they gave us our kitten Alfredo, since their cat had kittens. But moving on from that a tidbit, the neighbors on the end in the apartment 4 moved out and it was remodeled. During this time, the police came one night at 12 or so and asked if we had seen anyone in the windows on that apartment. I said no, that nobody was there and hadn't been besides the construction crew, and they hadn't been by for a few days now. They told me that someone had been seen in there though, but there was no sign of break-in or anything. It was locked in tight, and this was a 1-bedroom, so it wasn't like the person had somewhere to hide or anything, especially with no curtains. It was a U-shaped apartment, same as the rest of them, and we didn't know what happened there and never did. The police also had no idea what happened, and neither did my landlord. Over the course of years, things would move and fall too. They would be gone one day and then just reappear again on the counter randomly. My partner isn't big on touching my stuff, so I know that he didn't do this, and it would be odd to touch half the stuff that had gone missing and reappeared like that. When I was alone, I'd often feel like somebody was behind me. I would see my cat growl at corners and do really odd things. This may sound like classic ghost stuff, but this is genuinely the stuff that happened. We ended up moving back with my parents at the end of the lease, and overall it was just a really creepy place. I often joked about good old Cliff doing check-ins when I felt off, but I don't know if it was actually him or not. I honestly think that it was the other man who actually did die there, and I couldn't get much more detail about it from my other neighbor, given that they weren't there either when it happened. But Cliff talked about how the guy had passed or whatever. I'm just very glad to have moved out though, and I still have dreams about loved ones who have passed, and I did dream about Cliff at once. I was sitting in the living room similar to mine with a rocking chair and old pictures around us. I really don't remember what we talked about. Other dreams I've had are from my cousin who has passed. He usually just hugs me and says hi, and I always tell him that he shouldn't be here, and he just says, I know, which is odd to hear a dead person in your dreams say, but anyway, they could just be dreams, and I'm really not sure about any of that. But this was my year of, well, I guess you could call it, paranormal stuff. This is one that I'd heard from my best friend's cousin's brother-in-law. I know, bit of a long connection there, but anyway. He was a security guard at a Native American casino. He was white and the other 2 guards were Navajo, but everybody got along pretty great. He mainly patrolled the parking lots in the official car park, and most nights it wasn't very busy. Usually someone passing out drunk on the way to their car, sometimes a fight, once in a while a medical emergency, but really that's about it. Well, one night though, there was a murder. Somebody's girlfriend or boyfriend objecting to somebody being out with another boyfriend or girlfriend. The casino, which was open 24/7, closed down for 24 hours out of respect and for the police to conduct their investigation and all of that. Guy showed up for work as usual and did his usual patrols, but there was nobody around and no cars in the parking lot. So Guy stops in the middle of the empty parking lot to write his report. It's about 2 a.m. at this stage, bright moon, lots of stars, and as he's writing, he's startled by somebody knocking on the door of the car. He looks up to see a Navajo kid, maybe about 8 years old, wearing pants but no shirt. "Let me in," says the kid. Guy reaches for the door handle because obviously the kid needs help, but he stops all of a sudden. What is a kid doing in an empty parking lot in a casino, miles away from any main road? The kid knocks again. "Let me in," impatiently he says. Guy goes from startled to full-on scared, pulls his hand back from the door handle, and reaches for the ignition. The kid begins pounding on the door all of a sudden, screaming "let me in" over and over. guy tries to start the car, but the ignition doesn't catch. He turns it again and it finally catches. He floors it out of the parking lot and vrooms back to the guard shack at about 40 miles per hour. He stumbles into the guard shack, still pale and shaky. One of the Navajo guys jumps up and says, "Did it touch you?" "What? Did it touch you?" "Oh no, it touched the car." "Sit down," says the Navajo guy, and goes out to his car. He comes back with a medicine bag and sings a blessing over our guy, and apparently we must never speak of this again. And here I am speaking of it, looking over both shoulders as I share it. So I've always been interested in the dark, creepy, weird paranormal stuff from a young age, and developed a love for horror films as well. I watched Child's Play and Night of the Living Dead as my first two horror films, and honestly I loved them. As I've gotten older, I started to branch out beyond horror films, and I watched paranormal stuff involving aliens, cryptids, demons, and general high strangeness, I guess. And while I've always been eager to learn new things about this field, I've never considered myself a believer. I want to see it to believe it, you know. So I call myself an open-minded skeptic. Now, I've lived at the same house most of my life, and there's been things over the years that have been odd, I guess, or weird, but never anything that I'd call proof of paranormal activity. Like swearing that you've seen a shadow move by you in the basement, hearing someone talking when you're home alone. The regular spooky stuff all hauntings have. But nothing ever really made it clear to me that my house was haunted and ghosts were real. That is, until an event a few years ago that scared the ever-living you-know-what out of me, because genuinely I have no idea how to explain it. So I live in Ohio, and July-August can bring miserable heat, and I have no central air, so open windows and fans were what we used. My mum was working third shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., so it was me and my brother, and it was around 2 or 3 in the morning, and my brother was already in bed a couple of hours at this point. I was ready to go and hit the hay, so I started shutting off the lights around and checking the doors to make sure everything was locked. The entire main floor of my house was dark outside from the hall light. Now, to describe the layout of the house, the hallway has a sort of upper case to it. To my left is my mum's room, and to my right, the kitchen, and behind me, the living room and the dining room. Then there's the hallway, at the end of which, to the left, are the stairs leading to upstairs and my room. To the right is the bathroom, and going straight is our back porch. Now, to get a breeze, we had the porch door open at night when it was much cooler. I walked down the hallway with the hallway light as the only light source that I had. I got to the porch door to shut it, and immediately, in the darkness of the porch, something makes a sound that I can only compare to movies, like when somebody is running to an elevator as the doors are closing, and they're trying to get someone in the elevator to hold the door, a sort of mumbled, "wait, no, no" sort of thing. And this faceless audio was right there at the door as if trying to get me to leave the door open. Suddenly, I felt a rush of air come at me as well, as these mumblings were being uttered. I get goosebumps even writing about this. But in total fear, I slammed the door as hard as I could and ran down the hallway into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. In the moment, expecting that it was some sort of intruder who had broken into my back porch and trying to get into the house to do, well, who knows what, I stood in the dark kitchen just out of sight of the back door and just listened, waiting to hear a person try to either get into the house or exit the porch. It was silent. Just silence. Nothing. I walked around the darkened areas of the house looking at windows for something, but there was nothing. I walk into my mum's room and peek through her window to get a view of the porch, and still nothing. I hear nothing, and it's still just complete silence. I paced around the darkness for a good 15 minutes on edge waiting for something or someone, and yet there was nothing. After I convinced myself that nobody was out there, I slowly walked the hall and shut that light off. Total darkness now, and I peeked out of the porch window to see the door, closed, lock still in place. It was nobody. But what did I hear? And what came rushing at me like that? Well, that was the day that I became more than just an open-minded skeptic. Truly, I believed. Something without a physical form, it spoke at me and came rushing towards me. And man, did it scare the heck out of me. I work overnight shifts as a nurse, and I often take care of patients who are actively passing away. A large part of my work is to make sure that they're comfortable, clean, and that I monitor the patient to keep the family updated on their condition. I have to keep moving at night time, so I always help my nursing aides rotate and clean my patients. Besides, it allows me to keep close tabs on how my patients are doing. Now, last night, I was helping one of my techs, and we noticed the patient was starting to breathe much slower and was starting to have pauses, though not for very long. Estimating when someone is going to pass is never an exact science, but there are signals that I can report to the family that the patient is having signs indicating that they're likely going to be passing soon. So after we finished rotating the patient, I called the patient's family to pass on what I had seen. It's unfortunately a little after 1 a.m. when I call the priority contact, but after ringing twice it went to voicemail. I leave a message apologizing for the late call, explain who I am and why I'm calling, and leave a callback number. My tech and I are back in the patient's room again at 3 a.m. taking care of the patient, and now the patient's breathing is getting even more drawn out. Again, I call the patient's family and again leave a voicemail explaining how I felt the patient won't be around much longer. At 5 a.m. I go and sit in the patient's room to chart on my mobile computer and just listen to my fella breathe. Towards the end of my charting, I noticed that the patient's breathing had finally stopped. After doing a quick assessment, I called my tech into the room and we prepped the body for the family to come and visit, and I called the family again at maybe 6 a.m. to update them on their family members passing. This time, they answered the phone and came to the hospital right away as they lived pretty close. 6:30ish, the patient had 2 family members come up to the unit and I guided them to the patient's room for them to come and say their final goodbyes. As I left the room, I closed the door behind me to give them some privacy in such an intimate moment. The day shifters were starting to filter in when I suddenly heard a banging coming from down the hall from the nursing station. I quickly got up and investigated, as banging noises at like 7:05 is the bane of my existence, and I find that the banging had come from my expired patient's room. I quickly run up to the closed door and call out, "What's going on? Is everyone okay?" as I push on the door handle to let me into the room. But the door handle doesn't budge an inch. I look down to double check that I'm pushing the right part of the door as I hear a panicked call from the other side. The door isn't opening. Now, patient doors in hospitals are designed with a heavy emphasis on safety. They're designed to be simple so that staff can get in and out in case of an emergency. There's no locking mechanism and it's a push handle, so it's easy to open. I try said push handle again and again, but it just doesn't budge. I shrug my shoulders and consider how I don't have to pay for repairs and tried pushing with actual man strength and, again, not a budge. I was in and out of that room all night, and that's not including my tech doing the same. We've opened and closed this door repeatedly, and now it's completely immovable? In the end, I had to call engineering to get someone to take the door off the handle. Thankfully, the team came quickly, got the door off the wall, and let the terrified family out. I left shortly afterward, as it was after 7:23 at this point, and laughed to myself the whole way home. Honestly, It seemed like my patient wanted to spend more time with their family, whether the family wanted to or not. Almost 40 years ago, I was a pupil at a boarding public school, a private school for non-British readers, in a rural part of the UK. The boarders lived in a vast, rambling, Victorian Gothic manor house near the main school, and the story was that the family who originally built it had gone bankrupt a few years after it was constructed, and it was sold to a lady who used a wheelchair. This being in the days before widespread electricity, particularly in such a rural location, she travelled between floors by means of a dumb waiter operated by a servant who pulled or released the rope to allow her to go up or down, with the dumb waiter being accessed through a doorway on each floor. One day, though, a careless servant apparently let go of the rope for some reason, and the dumb waiter, with the lady in it, fell from the top floor all the way to the cellars, which extended far below the house, and was tragically killed. Bear in mind that I was told this story shortly after I arrived at the school, and before the main event of my tale occurred. I was also told that she apparently haunted the house, although I was highly skeptical about that part. Now, opposite the dormitory, which I shared with several other boys, was a bricked-up doorway, i.e. a door frame, but nothing else. I was told that this was the entrance to the dumb waiter, and verified that identical bricked-up doorways existed on floors above and below it, including in the cellars. I sneaked down there late one night despite us being forbidden to enter it. Now, about 11 o'clock one night, my roommates and I were in bed. Most were asleep, but I wasn't at this stage. The lights had been turned out by the staff a couple of hours before, and we were forbidden to talk after this took place. All was dark and silent, and as I lay there struggling to fall asleep, a very loud scream suddenly came from outside the door. I will swear until my dying day that it was an adult woman as well. A woman's scream sounds different from that of a girl or a man, and a scream of absolute pure terror. It only lasted a couple of seconds, and then it faded away. My roommates, they were awakened by it, and I could hear the doors of other dormitories further down the corridor and on the floor above opening as people flooded out of their rooms to find out what was going on. Within a couple of minutes, the housemaster and several other teachers had also arrived on the scene and accused us of making the noise, issuing threats of severe punishment once the perpetrator was identified. And well, that never happened, of course. I've never been able to explain it either, but the scream came, as far as I could tell, from the old entrance to the dumb waiter, which, mind you, had been bricked up for over 100 years, if the stories were true. It was also definitely from an adult woman, and there were none in the boarding house at that time of night. I know that I didn't imagine it, as about 50 other people heard it too. So was it an echo of that poor lady's last trip down the dumb waiter so many years ago? And after nearly 4 decades, I still have been unable to come up with any other explanation. So I've told a few close friends about this encounter, and they've all agreed that it was very weird. I thought that I would share it here too to see if anybody else has ever had any similar experiences. This happened roughly about 5 years ago. I was in my last year of university, and I was living in a shared house with 3 other students. This evening everyone in the house was out. It must have been winter, as I recall it not being that late in the day, but it was also completely dark outside by this stage. I got a message that evening from someone that I knew, asking if they could come over. To provide a little bit more context, the person who messaged me was an acquaintance at most, someone that I had briefly met on a night out and had a handful of conversations with. I must have told her at some point that I lived pretty close to the gym that we both went to, because she was either going to or from the gym, and it was pouring down, and was wondering if she could stop at mine until the rain cleared. It was a bit out of the blue, I'll admit, but it seemed like a relatively reasonable request, given that it was raining pretty heavy that evening. In any case, I told her that it was fine for her to come over, and to stay until the rain cleared. When she arrived, I was watching a film in my room, and as I wasn't expecting any company, I wasn't going to change my plans for that evening, so I told her that she could join me to finish watching the film if she wished. It started to get weird a short while after she sat down next to me, though. I vividly remember getting weird bursts of light filling my vision. Not faint specks, but bright white explosions suddenly clouding my entire view. They came and went pretty quickly, but I'd say it happened 3 to 4 times throughout that evening. I remember at the time trying not to think too much about it. My justification for it was that it was dark and the only light was the light beaming from the TV, which means that some contrasting light flickers from the film must be playing with my vision or something. Alongside the light burst, though, I kept getting this strong feeling that a hand was hovering over my shoulder, the side opposite to the side that she was sitting on, so strongly that I had to repeatedly turn to look over my shoulder to check. I thought that she was trying to put her arm over my shoulder at one stage. Every time there was nothing there, though, I again justified it as being another trick of the light in the dark room. Well, after the film had finished, the rain had stopped and she was getting up to leave. At this point, I was conscious that a few strange things had occurred, but nothing I was going to lose any sleep over. That was until, while she was getting her shoes on, she made a really strange twitch with her shoulder. Now, I normally wouldn't call someone out on their seemingly innocent twitches like this, but I decided to query her this time on why she suddenly jolted like that. Very calmly, without even stopping to look at me while she was doing up her laces, she told me that she apparently has a demon that follows her, and every time it touches her shoulder, she twitches. I remember standing frozen, unsure of what even to say back to that. I think I mumbled something banal like, I see, while my mind was frantically thinking back to how the entire evening I had spent feeling like a hand had been hovering over my shoulder. If she had told me this information at the start of the evening, I could have believed that being predisposed to this information could have led me to imagine these oddities. But no, I saw it all and then was exposed to this revelation. She finished getting her shoes on and eventually she left. Needless to say, I didn't contact her again. I was pretty spooked about the whole situation for a good few days. Nothing odd has ever happened since this encounter. Those flashing lights never occurred again, and I never experienced that hovering over my shoulder again. I cannot say that this experience has made me a firm believer in the supernatural, but it was definitely the closest I've been to questioning it. For some background, my father grew up in a country where it's mostly farms and agriculture. Houses are very far apart, except for a few villages, and this event would have taken place sometime in the mid-late 80s. And as has been explained to me by both my parents, it was around this time that there weren't any phone lines, just streetlights, and really, that's about it. Now, my father started working around the age of 9. He would go down to the villages or centers in order to sell or deliver vegetables, as my grandparents grew vegetables like lettuce, tomatoes, and more. He would very often stay out late, as he would be required to deliver vegetables to several restaurants. And one night, as he was heading back, a herd of goats was obstructing the road. To put this into perspective as well, he uses a little carriage like the ones ice cream vendors tend to use in Hispanic countries, so he couldn't just scoot by as his carriage was being blocked as well. But then, from behind him, he heard a voice state, "How much for a lettuce, young man?" And when my father turned around, he says that he saw a 10-foot tall man who looked really skinny, bordering on malnourished with pale skin. He couldn't completely see his face, but he stated that from the little that he could see, his face was very sunken. The man was wearing overalls with a flannel shirt, a bandana on his neck, and a straw hat. I know that the description sounds very stereotypical, but again, this does take place in the deep country, like an hour away from any city or town. According to my father, though, the straw hat casted a shadow and thus he couldn't see the man's eyes. However, he could see his sunken cheeks and crooked teeth when he talked. My father was obviously weirded out, but due to how young he was, in his early teens, around 10 to 13, he just sort of assumed it was a very tall man, instead of something paranormal or something weird that he should have been afraid of. Thus, my father said the price and the man paid. My father handed him a piece of lettuce, which, according to him, the man was able to hold with one hand comfortably. As the man walked away with the lettuce, according to my father, the man whistled and the goats followed the man. My father then just headed home. If he did tell my grandma or anybody else like that, I'm still not sure if he specified everything. As I said before, this took place decades ago, and the area that this took place in was very isolated with no houses nearby. To explain the area a little bit better, a lot of oil palm trees are grown there, thus there are areas where you won't see a house for like a few miles even, and all you'll see are just huge banks of oil palm trees. As for how he knew that he was 10 feet, well, it was a guess, but he states that he was as tall as the ceiling of the house that we were in when he told the story, and the ceiling was pretty high. At least 10 feet is my guess. Whatever the case may be, he is certain that he was abnormally huge, like way larger than any human should be. I heard this story a few months ago, but I just found out about this place, so I decided to share it here since it's always intrigued me a lot. So if you have any questions, then please don't be shy to ask. I have plenty of stories like these, due to my family growing up in the deep country, and plenty of relatives stating that they've seen weird things here, but are they true? Well, I'm not sure, but I like to talk about them and think about them. I have been told that they are fact by many people, so if you want to hear them, then I would be happy to share them too.